As you are about to hear in the following stories, mental health is not something to be taken lightly, and it is important to stay on top of your mental health. You grow up imagining your life will look a certain way at a certain age, but things do not always work out the way you pictured. Maybe you do not end up in the job you thought you would. Maybe you are feeling stuck, or like everyone else is moving forward while you are just standing still. It can be hard to talk about that, even harder to ask for help. Maybe therapy always feels like something other people did. But then I learned that it is not about having something wrong with you. It is about understanding yourself and finding a healthier way to move forward. That is where today's sponsor, BetterHelp, comes in. BetterHelp matches you with a licensed therapist after a short questionnaire, often in just a couple of days. And if it is not the right fit, you can switch therapist anytime at no extra cost. With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.3 rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform you can trust. Go to betterhelp.com/nightmare to get 10% off your first month. The link is also in the description. So, a little backstory. I dated this girl when I was in my senior year of high school. I am 20 now, so it was a couple of years ago, but still pretty fresh in my mind. For privacy's sake, I will not use her real name, so I will refer to her as Grace. Grace and I met through our job, which I now know is never ideal. Before we started dating, though, there were red flags that I simply should not have ignored. For instance, she would come to our place of work for hours just to watch me work, and I would catch her staring at me every once in a while. Besides that, a few months into our relationship, things started getting pretty toxic. I would constantly feel suffocated. I had no time for my hobbies, friends, or even myself. She was the type of girl to ask where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing 24/7. If I didn't answer a phone call, it would end up being 25 missed calls and a ton of text messages that would ultimately turn into a fight, even if I was just using the bathroom. It got to the point where I couldn't play games with my friends without it causing a fight. So, eventually, we broke up, but not without her doing everything in her power to convince me to come back. She would wait outside my place of work for me to get off, and when I would walk outside, she would follow me to my car, block me from getting in, and try to reason with me. I got sick of it. One night she came and wanted to talk, so I decided to talk with her, not really knowing what else to do. Grace was also trying to sue me for something extremely petty that I would rather not get into, and would use this as a scare tactic to make me talk to her. So anyway, I sat down in her car. She was saying the same old stuff I had heard hundreds of times. I told her I was done talking, but at that time her dad called her. She used this as a threat and told me, "If you do not sit here and talk to me, I will have him sue you now." And to that, I said, "Forget this," and attempted to get out of her car. The door was locked though, so as I was unlocking it, she grabbed hold of my arm and dug her nails into my skin. I looked at her and was genuinely shocked because she had only been verbally abusive before, never physical. I had also never seen that look on her face. It was pure malice, and I won't lie, I was pretty unnerved. I myself am a pretty tall guy, and she was very small, so I knew I could overpower her if I had to. I swung her door open and tried to step away, but she was holding me extremely tight. I told her to let me go, but she wouldn't budge. I kept pulling on my arm trying to get away, but she would not move an inch. At this point, my skin was starting to peel, so I made a judgment call and pulled her toward me onto the passenger seat, which gave me enough time to get away and into my car. I drove home faster than I ever have, and I really wish I could say it ended there, but of course it doesn't. Unfortunately for me, Grace and I are practically neighbors, and she lives a couple blocks away. That night while I was playing video games, I heard a car outside, but I kind of chalked it up to my game as I remember playing Grand Theft Auto 5 that night. I had also smoked a bit of weed, so I figured that would have made the car noises louder. A little bit of time passed, and as I was playing, I heard a tap on my window. I thought I was being paranoid, as weed can tend to make me a little on edge sometimes, especially after what had happened. But that thought quickly faded after I heard another tap and a female voice saying my name. I knew it was Grace, and I started to panic. My window doesn't have the best blinds, so I knew she could see me. I didn't want to open my window, because at this point I knew she could be potentially dangerous. I pretended not to hear her, hoping that she would go away. But of course, she didn't, because after a minute or two, she started banging on my window. Her tone changed from soft and apologetic to more aggressive and angry. I couldn't make out much of what she was saying, but it was something along the lines of, "You can't do this to me, you're an asshole." That sort of deal. I had to do something. I didn't want to waste the cops' time, but now looking back at it, I absolutely should have called them. I made the stupid decision to open my window and ask what she wanted. I asked why she was here and why she couldn't just leave me alone. Her tone changed once again to soft-spoken, and she was asking for her sweater back. I yelled at her and told her she can't just be at my window at 2 in the morning asking for a sweater. And then I said if she didn't leave my property, I'd be calling the cops. At this point, she blew up screaming at me, while starting to sob uncontrollably. For a moment I actually felt bad, but then my heart dropped as I saw something that still sends shivers down my spine to this day. She wasn't alone. To the left of her was a thick tree in our front yard, and peeking out from it was a hooded figure. She saw me move to focus to the tree, and she knew I saw them. She reached for my arm and grabbed me, and as she did this, I saw the person run out from behind the tree, but I couldn't make out any facial features. It did not matter because they were sprinting toward my window. In that moment, my fight or flight kicked in, and I slammed my window shut on Grace's arm. She screamed out in pain and pulled it back. I slammed it shut and locked it just before the other person reached my window. My heart was racing, and it felt like I couldn't breathe. I showed them my phone dialing 911, and at that they hurried back to her car, started it, and drove away. I was in total shock, not even comprehending what had just happened. They sent an officer to my house. He took down my story and told me they'd call if anything came of it. Of course, there wasn't much they could do, as there was no evidence anything happened like most 911 calls. As far as I know, she never had any legal action taken against her. As for what they wanted with me, she's also gotten people jumped and robbed before, so I wouldn't doubt they wanted to do that, or possibly worse. I'm just extremely lucky that the person hiding behind the tree decided to peek out. It is incredibly unsettling to realize that someone you once trusted, someone you let into your personal space, could turn on you so quickly. But as terrifying as it is to deal with an ex who refuses to let go, it is another thing entirely when they begin to systematically infiltrate your life, turning your own home into a place of constant fear. That is exactly what happened to a young woman named Amy. My name is Amy, and I haven't really slept much since last Tuesday. Not because I can't, but because I don't feel safe closing my eyes anymore. That's what happens, I guess, when someone you thought you knew turns out to be capable of something you only expect from horror movies. I broke up with my boyfriend Tommy 3 weeks ago. It wasn't dramatic, at least not at first. We'd been dating for just under a year. In the beginning, he was sweet. He was overly attentive and always texting and calling like any partner wants. At first, it felt like real love, the kind you think you're lucky to have. But over time, it turned possessive. He'd get upset if I took too long to reply. He'd ask weird questions like who I'd smiled at that day, or if I'd seen any guys looking at me. Sometimes he'd show up at my job unannounced, just standing outside the window like he was checking in. He even showed up to the bars I was at with friends if I was having a girls' night out, and then forced me to come home with him. My friends started to hate him for these exact reasons. He never trusted me, but I didn't end it until he started asking if I'd ever consider putting a tracker on my phone to keep each other safe. Not to start sharing each other's locations, but to literally put a tracker on my phone. That was the last straw for me. I told him it was over, and in response he cried at first, but then he went silent. I remember hanging up on our last call with this strange tightness in my chest, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. For a little while things were quiet. I blocked his number and tried to move on. I started going back to the gym, cooking real meals, just trying to feel normal again. But about a week after the breakup, I started getting strange messages, not from Tommy, or at least not directly, but from random numbers with no name or context. They were short, usually just a vague single sentence. I didn't reply to any of them. That's a surefire way to get a spam number to know to keep harassing you. I just blocked each number as it came. I didn't tell my friends. I told myself it was probably a scam or some spam bot, because I've always gotten spam texts. But then things moved beyond just random texts. One night, I was in bed and had to get up to use the bathroom. I went into the hallway outside my bedroom, and before entering the bathroom, I thought I heard a soft noise come from downstairs in the foyer. I'm not the type of person to go check on a noise. I get scared in the dark, hence why I always like being in a relationship so I don't have to stay alone all the time. I didn't go down to check it. I convinced myself it was just a radiator clicking or something. I've lived in this apartment for almost 2 years, and most of that time was spent living with my ex, George, and then Tommy the remainder of that time, but hardly ever alone. I know the sounds the building makes, and honestly, that sound was not one I'd heard before. So, after I went to the bathroom, I went straight back into my room and jumped into bed, thinking the thin sheet of blanket cloth would protect me from whatever was out there. Another night, around 2 in the morning, I could have sworn I heard a door in my apartment click open from outside my room. That was the sound that woke me up, so I wasn't 100% sure of it. It could have been part of my dream, maybe. Still, my heart was racing. I texted my family group chat with my siblings, and my parents just saying, "I keep hearing noises every night, and I am getting scared." Of course, they were all asleep though, so I eventually went back to sleep. That weekend, I came home from visiting my sister and immediately felt like something was off the second I walked inside. Nothing was missing or broken, but I felt like maybe doors were left open at angles that they weren't left before. It may sound far-fetched, but it is not. I have a habit of leaving doors closed or near closed when I leave my apartment. All the doors were basically fully open in the entire apartment. There was no draft at all. I keep the air conditioning on most of the time. I walked through the apartment slowly, checking each room. My stomach dropped when I saw that the hallway closet was slightly open. Now I knew something was wrong. I always leave that closet door closed. There is no reason to leave it open, and plus the door tends to swing out if I do leave it open. I stared at it for what felt like a full minute before I approached. When I pulled it fully open, nothing was there. Just coats and shoes, same as usual. That night, I pushed a chair under my bedroom door and slept with a knife under my pillow. I kept the bedside lamp on. I must have dozed off at some point, because I woke up to the sound of something moving, just a soft shuffle. I sat up slightly, confused, and then I realized the light was now off and the room was dark. I looked toward the door. I could see it was open, but I had wedged a chair under it. How could it be wide open? At first, I thought maybe I dreamed wedging the chair and leaving on the light, or maybe I'd gotten up in my sleep, but I quickly found out how wrong I was. I saw something at the foot of my bed in the dark. I swear I couldn't tell what it was. It was just some black mass in the dark. But when I finally started realizing that what I was looking at was the top half of someone's head, it was too late because I felt 2 hands start caressing my feet, and I completely lost it. I screamed so loud until I had no air left in my lungs, and I instantly recognized Tommy's voice telling me to calm down. But when I kept screaming, he got on top of me and put his hand over my mouth. He told me he wasn't there to hurt me, just to talk. He said he wouldn't let go of my mouth until I agreed to be quiet. So I nodded. The first thing I asked him was how he got into my apartment, and he said he made a copy of my key when we were together, just in case there was ever an emergency. He never told me he did this. It was straight psychopath behavior. He must have snuck out overnight one night with my keys to do it somewhere. As I sat there, I debated pulling the knife, but I was too scared to actually use it. He kept saying he wasn't there to hurt me, just to talk. But he was simply trying to scare me into getting back with him. Too terrified to say no in fear of what he might do, I agreed, but asked him to leave for the night because I was too shook up. He stayed in my bed for half an hour before finally leaving. Once he was gone, I called the police and reported the break-in, lying that he was still on the premises so they would actually come quickly. I made a report and filed a restraining order. A detective later traced the burner numbers back to his cell phone through a fake number app, which helped secure the order. I stayed with my parents until I got a new apartment. My advice to women is to get away at the first sign of this kind of obsessive behavior. I still live with the trauma of waking up to him in my dark room, caressing my feet, and having to consider pulling a knife on him. It is incredibly difficult to move on when the person you once cared for decides to turn your life into a game of cat and mouse. You change your locks, you file reports, and you try to rebuild your boundaries. But sometimes, even moving to a completely different city or state is not enough to break the connection. For some stalkers, the distance is just a challenge, a way to make the game even more intense. This was the reality for a man who thought he had finally escaped his ex-girlfriend Marissa, only to realize that her obsession followed him across state lines, into the mountains, and straight to his front door. I dated Marissa for a year and a half. At first, she was one of the most intense people I'd ever met. Not in a bad way. She was passionate, charismatic, and could talk about anything for hours. When she left, it was like she pulled you into her world. The first few months were incredible. She'd surprise me with gifts, leave sticky notes with poems on my mirror, text me goodnight every single night without fail. But that intensity had a darker side. She didn't do calm or wait and see. Everything was either perfect or catastrophic. If I was 5 minutes late responding to a text, she'd send a stream of messages. First worried, then angry, and then apologizing. It got worse slowly, almost invisibly. She once accused me of cheating because I liked an Instagram post from a girl I hadn't spoken to since high school. And when I told her that something she did made me uncomfortable, she would shut down completely. I do not mean just get quiet. I mean, she would sit in my apartment for hours staring at the wall, just refusing to leave until I told her everything was fine. The first time she showed up at my office unannounced was 6 months in. She brought coffee and acted like it was cute, like we were some television couple. I laughed it off, but the second time was because I hadn't answered her call. She stayed parked outside in the lot until I came down. She'd been crying. I told her it wasn't okay, and she just smiled and said, "You do the same for me, right?" I didn't have an answer for that. I kept making excuses for her. Trauma, abandonment issues, childhood stuff. I thought if I just proved I wasn't going to leave, she'd calm down. Instead, the more I gave, the more she needed. Eventually, I reached my limit. I told her it had to end. She didn't yell or cry. She just stared at me in silence for what felt like minutes. Then she nodded and said, "You think it is over for you, but it is not over for me." I remember how cold that made me feel, like it wasn't even a threat, just a fact. I blocked her on everything that same night, and I changed my number. I even asked my building manager if I could get a different unit. For a few weeks, I thought it worked. Then the letters started showing up. The letters had no stamps or return addresses, just my name handwritten on the envelope, usually left between my door and the frame. I held on to some of these notes. The first one was kind of nostalgic. It said, "I miss waking up to you. I still sleep on the side of the bed where you used to lay." The second one got stranger. It said, "You always check the door 3 times before you go to bed. You probably do not even notice it, but I do." The third letter was the one that made me pack a suitcase. It said, "You wore your blue hoodie Monday, the one with the hole in the sleeve. You should sew that up before it gets worse." That was the same hoodie I wore when I went to pick up groceries that day at a store across town in the pouring rain. I hadn't seen anyone, not a single person I recognized, but she had seen me. I knew then that moving across the city would not be enough. I found a job in Denver, a good one. I did not tell anyone except my brother and immediate family. I left no forwarding address. I even created a new email for the job, and I didn't link any personal info. I went completely dark. I even got a P.O. box under a false name. I thought that would be enough, and for a while it was. Many months passed and I slept soundly. I started dating again. Nothing serious, just drinks and movies, but I was laughing again. I felt like a person. Then one Saturday I opened my P.O. box and found an envelope. Just my name again. No stamp or return address. Inside was a Polaroid. It was of me walking my apartment building, taken from behind. My earbuds were in, and I had a coffee in one hand. It was cold out. You could see snow on the sidewalk and the mountains in the background. I checked the back, and written in red ink it said, "Your shoulders slouch when you're tired." I did not wait. I moved again faster this time. I paid cash for a rental in a different part of town, smaller building and fewer tenants. I switched jobs once again and told my boss I had family stuff and had to go fully remote. I got a rescue dog who was big and loud, a big German Shepherd mix to try and keep me sane. I deleted mostly everything online, and I had no apps or social media. I went gray for almost a year and heard nothing. No letters or pictures anymore. I let myself believe she was finally gone until the post-it note. It was stuck to my front door one evening when I got home from walking the dog. It was a yellow note with red ink, and it said, "I do not like the beard." My stomach actually dropped. I had grown it out maybe 3 months prior. Nobody had seen me with it, except the dog, and maybe my work webcam, which I kept taped over unless on a call. I shaved it off that night. I told myself it was a coincidence. But the next morning, another note was waiting. Tucked under the windshield wiper of my car, it said, "Better." I contacted the police, but they said without threats or property damage, there wasn't anything they could do. I couldn't get a restraining order because I couldn't prove she'd been near me. I changed my habits, locking the doors and drawing the blinds, barely sleeping. 2 weeks passed. Then one night I woke up with a horrible feeling that someone had just been watching me. I checked the doors and windows, but nothing was out of place. The next morning, however, a small envelope was taped to my front door. Inside was a photo of Marissa and me in a boardwalk photo booth from when we were together. We were smiling, but her eyes had been aggressively scratched out with a needle or a pin. I moved again, not across town this time, but out of the city completely. I found a small cabin 3 hours into the mountains. It was isolated and surrounded by pine trees with only one road in. I paid in cash and used a fake name on the lease, which was a month-to-month payment system. I left my old smartphone behind, getting a second phone number in the process. I bought a burner phone for emergencies and worked remote through a secure company laptop. No one besides my immediate family and my best friend knew where I was. For a whole month, things were finally quiet until I heard footsteps outside crunching the snow right outside my window. My dog went ballistic. The next morning, I found shoe footprints going from window to window all around the house. There were no notes left, but I knew it was her. I spent that entire day packing my things and driving back to my hometown. Today, I am living in a house with 3 roommates who were in the military. Their pickup trucks, purple heart plates, and giant flags are a major deterrent to Marissa playing her games. She is a mentally unstable stalker and a danger to everyone. I just wish law enforcement was willing to step in and do something before she found me again. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. Not to get too deep into my own backstory or disclose too much personal information about myself, but I will just come right out and say it. I have always been a very reclusive person. Ever since I was a young kid, I just did not have many friends at all. I spent almost all of my free time playing video games on the computer or the various game consoles I grew up with. But as I got older, around the time I was in high school, I started to get into going on really long walks. I would just go out and explore the world around me. It started with walking through the woods near my house, or walking through local cemeteries. But then, I developed a bit of an obsession with trespassing. I loved going to places where I was not supposed to be. It began with sneaking into cemeteries at night. Then I started getting more experimental with it. I would explore abandoned hospitals, closed down schools, and empty warehouses. When I was finally old enough to drive, it made accessing all of these places much easier. I only ever went with one of my few friends once or twice, but honestly, I enjoyed it a lot more when I was by myself. Part of my weirdness includes the fact that I just do not get scared exploring abandoned places at night alone. Or perhaps I should use the past tense and say I did not used to get scared, because after what happened, things changed. Back then, how I used to find a lot of these abandoned structures was actually a lot simpler than you might think. I would just go on Google Earth on my computer and zoom into really rural areas. Then I would look for abandoned-looking structures in unsuspecting places. I would make a list of 5 to 10 coordinates of these structures, and then I would try to visit them all in a single day. Sometimes they would not be abandoned at all, and I would have to turn around, but eventually I got pretty good at gauging which ones would be empty. This hobby involved a lot of walking through thick woods, and yes, before you ask, I did have a regular job. I worked a minimum wage job as a stock boy at a local supermarket. So, when I was not doing that or in school, a lot of my time was spent doing this. One of the places on my list one day turned out to be an abandoned little church deep in the forest. To get there, I had to park my car on a narrow dirt road and hike in. It was about a 10-minute walk from where I left my car. I always wore thick jeans and heavy work boots so that I could travel faster through the woods without hurting myself on thorns, sharp branches, or rocks. As I walked, I started noticing old rusted garbage cans and other random junk scattered on the ground, which indicated I was getting close to a structure. And then I saw a clearing in the distance. Sitting right there in the middle of a random clearing in the woods was a dilapidated old church. It had an old stone well right in front of the building. I walked over to the well to see if it had been sealed up for safety, but surprisingly, it was completely open. I leaned over and looked down, but it was so deep that it was just pitch black. When I stopped and listened though, I heard something down there. It was a faint, rhythmic clicking sound. One click, then a 2-second pause, then another click. It did not sound like water dripping at all. The best way I can describe it is the sound of a dry wooden stick being tapped against a stone wall. I was so curious that I stared down into the well for a lot longer than I should have, almost like I was hypnotized by the sound. But eventually, I broke out of my daze and decided to go inside the church itself. I stepped onto the creaking wooden porch and the rotted boards gave way slightly under my weight. The large double doors at the entrance were ajar. Out of all the abandoned structures I had visited, unless it was a very famous one that was posted on online forums, nobody really bothered to board them up. I pushed one of the doors open further, and it let out a loud, heavy groan that echoed through the quiet trees. The air inside was thick with dust and smelled strongly of old wood. Light poured through the shattered pieces of stained glass in the windows. Some of the pews were overturned, and others were missing entirely. The pulpit stood crooked at the front, and behind it, an arched doorway led further into the darkness. I did my usual routine, scanning the room with my flashlight and taking a few pictures with my digital camera for my personal archive. There was an eerie beauty to the decay of a holy place like this. I walked slowly toward the back of the church where the arched doorway was. I stepped through it and found a narrow hallway that led to what looked like old storage rooms. One door was missing entirely, and the others were splintered and hanging off their hinges. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling everywhere, and then, at the end of the hallway, I saw a stairway leading down into the basement. I thought to myself that I had hit the jackpot. Like I said, I used to not let anything scare me. Something about exploring abandoned basements excited me. But this time, as I stood looking down at the dark stairs, I paused. I honestly got a slight chill, but I kept going. I started down the stairs slowly, and each step creaked so loudly that I feared I would fall through the wood. I counted the steps as I went. I got to the 7th step, and then my right foot landed on one that gave way with a loud crack. Before I could even react, the wood collapsed under me. I fell hard and landed in a pile of junk and dirt below the stairs. I fell directly on my tailbone, and it hurt badly. I let out some kind of complaint, probably cursing under my breath. My flashlight had flown out of my hand when I fell, so I crawled over to grab it. That was when I heard a voice. It was a higher-pitched voice, sounding like either a woman or a young boy. It was saying words, but I could not understand any of them except for one thing. The voice clearly said hello. The rest of it was complete gibberish, like someone trying to talk who did not know how. I stood up and pointed my flashlight around. It was just a typical old basement, with some busted furniture, broken chairs, a dirt floor, and stone walls. But then I saw a tunnel in the wall. It looked like it had been dug out by hand. As I approached it, I realized the voice was coming from down there. I started walking toward it. I knew I was being incredibly dumb, but I just had to know what was in there. I took a couple of steps inside the tunnel and looked around. The walls were rough and uneven, clearly dug out with a shovel. Suddenly, my flashlight started flickering. My heart nearly stopped. I hit the side of the flashlight a few times, and the light stayed on. But doing that made a much louder noise than I had anticipated. The moment that noise echoed, the voice got much louder. It was still the same gibberish, but it was coming from deeper inside the tunnel. And then it stopped. Everything went completely quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard a click. 2 seconds later, another click. It was the exact same rhythm as the well, and the sound was echoing. The clicks and the voice were getting louder. My heart was in my throat. I turned around and ran. I reached the stairs and remembered one of the steps was broken. I found it easier to grab the sides of the wooden stairs and pull myself up instead of trying to hop over the broken step. My flashlight dropped, but it did not matter. I was leaving the basement and heading back to the light of the upper floor. I got to the top and did not look back. I ran through the hallway, through the main room, and out the front doors. I ran past the well and stopped for just a second. The clicking sound was completely gone. In fact, there was no noise at all. It was dead silence. I did not even hear any birds. I looked down the well one more time, seeing nothing but pitch blackness. and then I turned and ran through the woods. I made it to my car much faster than I had walked to the church, completely out of breath. I cut my day short and did not explore the other places on my list. I just drove home in complete silence with the music turned off. I did not give up my hobby entirely, but I definitely took a break. I was admittedly very spooked. I hope it was just some other kids trying to mess with people, but deep down, I know that sounds highly unlikely. But the problem was, sometimes you go looking for adventure, and you find something much worse than an old empty building. Fast forward to another experience that happened to me a while ago, and it is still completely stuck in my mind. My friends and I often like to spend our free time in the outdoors. I will refer to my friends as John and Anthony. One afternoon, we were bored and decided to go fishing deep in the woods near some local farmland. We thought we were far enough away from anyone, but we ended up getting chased out by a farmer and his large dog. We tried to hide in the brush, but his dog found us, and the farmer threatened to call the police, even though he was already on his phone talking to a friend of his, which we found pretty weird. Honestly, we kind of found the whole thing funny at the time. So for whatever reason, we thought it would be a good idea to go back there the very next day. We decided we would sneak onto the property to explore it. It was nearing about an hour before dark when we started, and this property was absolutely massive, covering acres upon acres of land. We had to hike through some very deep woods, similar to the area where we had been fishing the day before. Although we had scoped the property out on Google Maps, it was still incredibly easy to get lost in those trees. I remember thinking to myself that we should make sure we were out of there before it got completely dark. At first, everything seemed totally normal. I was not getting any bad gut feelings. We were admiring the horses in the fields and even walked up to the fence to pet them. But I remember thinking it was a bit weird that a farm of this size only had horses. I compared it in my head to my uncle's farm, which is a lot smaller, but has about 10 different types of animals, not just one. I just brushed the thought off, thinking that maybe the owner specialized in horses. After walking through the woods for a while longer, we reached the fence that bordered the main part of the property. John was leading the way, I was in the middle, and Anthony was behind us. This is when we stumbled upon something completely unexpected. In a clearing, we saw a highly run-down house surrounded by multiple luxury sports cars and a broken-down RV. We were absolutely shocked by what we were looking at. We snuck closer, keeping low, and walked around some of the cars. There was also a very creepy, run-down wooden shed nearby. It was crazy to see. I actually took out my phone and recorded a video of the scene. There were multiple Porsches, Range Rovers, Ford Raptors, Bentleys, Corvettes, and even Ferraris. The deeper we got into the clearing and the more cars we saw, the more we realized that we probably should not be seeing this. Many of the luxury cars were completely parted out, with doors, hoods, and engines missing. We immediately suspected that we had stumbled upon some kind of criminal ring that was stealing high-end cars and stripping them down. After we had seen all the cars, John decided it would be a good idea to explore the inside of the camper. While Anthony kept watch, I held the camper door open for John. Since John was the smallest of the three of us, we figured he was the best fit to climb inside and take a quick look. Inside the camper, there was clear evidence that someone was actively living there. There were fishing rods, fresh food, bedding, and a lot of other personal items. Although the camper was run down, we understood it was someone's home, so we got out of there. I forgot to mention, there were also several car tires piled up inside. We were not there to break or destroy anything. We were just curious. We snuck around to the back of the property, where all the stripped cars were kept. We saw some side-by-side utility vehicles and realized they were probably used to drive around the massive property. We also walked over to the run-down wooden shed. When we stepped near the entrance, a foul, absolutely horrible smell hit us. It was incredibly strong. We tried to laugh it off, joking that there must be a dead body hidden inside. None of us actually believed that, of course, but it was a way to cope with how creepy the place was. But then we heard the sound of the metal gate at the entrance of the property open and slam shut. It was about 1,000 feet away, but the sound carried clearly. We immediately started heading back toward the woodline because we did not want anyone to see us. Right as we reached the edge of the trees, a van turned onto the road we had been standing on. It was getting dark, and the van had its headlights turned on. We sprinted into the woods, hoping the driver had not seen us. At this point, we probably should have left, but we decided to explore the other side of the property. After walking along the outskirts and hiking through more woods, we passed another group of horses, but we finally got to the main house of the property. Again, the house looked extremely run down. About 25 feet to the right of the house was another camper. This one was massive, about 50 feet long, and it probably had not moved in 50 years. We almost missed it because it was completely covered in thick vines. Right next to it was another rundown jet ski, also covered in vines. We managed to pull the camper door open, but we did not want to make too much noise since we were so close to the main house. Even though the place seemed abandoned, we wanted to be cautious. Not just because we were trespassing, but because there was similar suspicious stuff on both ends of the property, which I could only assume was connected to the car stealing ring. I knew if we were caught, it would be a massive problem. We snuck around the side of the main house, and that was when we saw what was probably the most luxurious car on the entire property. Although it was old and a bit run down, it was still an amazing sports car, a Ferrari. I did not get a picture or video of it because we were still near the main house, and the horses nearby were making a lot of noise, which was making us nervous. We got sketched out on the far end of the property. There was a boat and a large outdoor freezer. John looked around the boat, while the freezer sat about 15 feet into some very thick vegetation. We joked about the probability of a body being hidden in the freezer. At this point, the mood was still kind of jokey, because we were just young guys exploring something we were not supposed to see. But as we got closer to the freezer, another terrible smell hit us. It was the unmistakable smell of death and rot. We decided to back off, assuming the worst, and we did not want to open the freezer, in case there was something in there we really did not want to see. We got a really bad vibe from the place, and we were on our way back when Anthony suddenly started hearing things. We paused and listened closely, and sure enough, we heard the noises too. I cannot really describe what they sounded like, and I do not know if they were just normal forest noises, or if everything just seemed amplified because we were paranoid. The vegetation around us was about head high, and there was a large rock nearby that each of us took turns standing on to get a better view of the property. When John went up onto the rock, we were still laughing and whispering jokes, but then John turned back to look at us, and his face was completely pale. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. He would not speak, so I decided to climb up onto the rock and look for myself. What I saw is something that is permanently burned into my brain. Looking out over the tall vegetation, about 50 feet away, I saw a man sitting at a table with a black cat. That alone was strange, but when I looked at his face, my heart stopped. There was no hair, no eyes, no mouth, and no nose. He had absolutely no facial features at all. You can call me crazy, but I know exactly what I saw. We were about 50 feet away, and it felt like the man was staring directly at us, but we genuinely could not see his eyes since he had no features. There was also a woman sitting at the table with him, and she made direct eye contact with me. The very second she saw me, she stood up and started running in a direction that would cut us off from the edge of the property. I do not know if the man's featureless face was real, or if he had white medical tape or bandages covering his head. I still cannot decide, but his face was pure white, and his head was very small. I still cannot get it out of my head. After that, it was completely dark, and we had a long hike through the woods to get back to where we came from. We felt as if we were being followed almost the whole way, and we almost took a route that was 2 miles out of the way just to get away from whatever was behind us. There were weird noises in the trees, like heavy stomping feet, galloping sounds, and distant screams. We tried to be as quiet as possible through the woods, but we also tried to move quickly. We ended up making it back to our car safely and made sure we were not followed. I genuinely still do not know what that was, or if it was even human, but I cannot get this experience out of my head, and I know none of us will ever go back there. At this point, you might think that is as bad as it gets, but things can escalate incredibly quickly when you trespass on the wrong person's property. This next story happened to me when I went to an old quarry in McKinney, Texas, and after what happened, I will never set foot near that place again. To give you some context, the first time I went to this quarry, it was already incredibly sketchy. My friends Josh, Miles and I had decided to go to this quarry for cliff jumping because we had seen some videos on YouTube of people cliff jumping there. Since we found out that it was only about a half-hour away from where we lived, we thought it would be a really good idea to go. Both Miles and I were old enough to drive, with me being 16 and Miles being 17. So, we thought that it would be a really fun weekend trip. Once we got to the quarry, the vibe was immediately off. There was a small dirt road that led up to the quarry, which made a complete circle around the water. To the left, there were these sketchy-looking white buildings, which were pretty much just white metal boxes. To the right, there was a fence that surrounded the rock path that led down to the quarry. We drove down this road in Miles' Jeep. There were tons of signs saying things like no trespassing or warning blasting zone. There was even a big white piece of cardboard that read trespassers will be shot on sight. Now, in Texas, people can legally shoot you if you are on their property, but it just does not really happen much. We decided to drive back to the beginning of the road, where there was a gravel parking lot next to an old building, which looked like it had not been touched in years. Miles parked the Jeep, and we all reluctantly got out of the car and began our walk toward the quarry. While we were walking, a truck drove right past us, and the driver just kind of stared at us with a completely blank expression on his face. Honestly, it was pretty scary when the truck passed us. But the fact that he did not do anything made us think that maybe the owners did not really care too much if people were on their property. We kept on walking, and then we came to the fence where we were supposed to jump over to get onto the rock path that led to the quarry. We went to the smallest cliff jumping spot first, but we saw a pretty big snake swimming in the water after the first 10 minutes of being there. So, we decided to wander further down the quarry where we saw a decent-sized cliff of about 35 feet. After depth checking the water to make sure it was safe, we spent about an hour cliff jumping there before we got bored and moved on to find a bigger cliff. We were at the very end of the quarry, walking down a narrow path to get to a bigger spot, when we saw a black Hummer suddenly stop right in front of us. A lady in her mid-30s rolled down the window and yelled, "What the hell are you doing on my property?" It honestly shocked us all. I responded by saying in an innocent voice that we thought this was public property. She obviously knew we were lying straight to her face, and she yelled at us some more. Then, she said something that I will never forget. She picked up her phone and said, "John, get the gun." Josh, Miles, and I all completely froze. We were scared to death. She told us to follow her, and she drove slowly down the path about 20 feet to a gate. We decided to follow her. We were all repeatedly saying that we were so sorry and that we would never come back again. She finally let us go after saying that the cops were on their way, so we had better haul ass before they got there. She pointed toward the dirt path that led away from her property. We thanked her and ran faster than any of us thought we could. We got back to the Jeep and drove away. I wish this was the end of the story, but it isn't. A couple of months later, Miles asked me if I would ever go back to that quarry. I reluctantly told him that if we could get a bigger group together, then I would go. We managed to get a group of 5 together, and we went back to the quarry in my car. I was the one driving, and after about an hour, we arrived at a local church where we planned to park. It was about a 2-minute walk from the quarry. We did not want the lady to somehow see my car and get my license plate number. We walked down the dirt road that led to the quarry and passed by a few cars. One car stopped next to us, and a guy who was probably in his early 20s told us to watch out for a black Hummer. We laughed and told him the story of what had happened to us the first time we went to the quarry. After that, we were back to walking down the dirt road. We jumped the fence that surrounded the quarry and decided we would go straight to the second spot so that we would at least be a tiny bit out of sight of the main dirt road. We had been at the spot for about an hour and were having fun when a silver van suddenly pulled up at the end of the dirt road about 25 yards away. It was not the black Hummer, so we did not run away just yet, but we did start getting our stuff ready in case we had to run. The van was mostly out of our sight due to the thick trees between us and the road. We waited there for about a minute, thinking that the driver was just doing something inside the car, when we suddenly heard 2 loud gunshots very close to us. The gunshots scared us half to death. The exit of the quarry was not very close, probably about 300 yards away. and we had to run about 125 yards just to get to the main dirt road which led off the property. I led the way, with my friend Aiden trailing not far behind me. I heard more gunshots about 40 yards away, and it sounded like the shooter had fired about 8 shots so far. But when I looked back, I could not see the guy who was shooting at us through the thick trees. We finally reached the fence and jumped over it, and we were now on the main dirt road that led to the exit. Out of pure luck, the guy we had talked to earlier, who had warned us about the black Hummer, was driving down the dirt road in his white truck. We begged him for a ride, and he let us hop in and drove us back to the end of the property. We thanked him and then ran back to my car. We all got in and drove away, promising ourselves that we would never go back to that quarry again. And then we have this last story from back in 2018. My cousin Ryan and I were really into urban exploration. We had been to old factories, closed down schools, and forgotten farmhouses that looked like they were one good windstorm away from collapsing. We were not stupid about it, though. We always checked the strength of the floors before walking on them, wore protective masks where there might be asbestos in the air, and avoided any place that seemed like it might be actively guarded. Still, there was one place we had been talking about for months that neither of us had worked up the nerve to try. It was a big abandoned house sitting on the shore of Lake Harlow. It was the kind of property you only ever saw from a distance, sitting far back from the main road behind a set of tall iron gates that had been bent inward years ago. Pine trees and thick brush had grown completely wild around the long driveway, hiding most of the house unless you caught a quick glimpse through the trees while driving past on the highway. Local rumors about the place were endless. The most common story was that a very wealthy family had lived there in the 1990s before they suddenly disappeared. People claimed they had left in the middle of the night without taking any of their belongings. Furniture, clothes, dishes, and even family photos were supposedly still inside the house. Theories ranged from financial ruin to witness protection to something even darker. No one had ever bought the property afterward, and the house had just sat there decaying for more than 2 decades. The afternoon we finally went, the weather was gray and very still. We parked at a hiking trail about a half-mile from the property, and we walked in through the woods to avoid being seen from the road. As we got closer, the massive roofline of the house appeared through the trees, and I realized just how big the place really was. It was 3 stories tall, with large windows and a wide wraparound porch, all in various stages of rot. The paint was peeling off the wood in long strips like sunburnt skin, and sections of the porch sagged heavily inward. We circled around to the back of the house, moving quietly in case there was anyone nearby. The back door was completely unlocked, and the moment we stepped inside, the air changed. The air was completely still and smelled faintly of lake water and old dust. The kitchen was the first thing we saw. It looked exactly like a movie set, completely frozen in time. Plates were stacked neatly on the counter, and a coffee cup with a dark brown ring of dried residue sat beside the sink. The wooden cabinet stood wide open, showing old boxes of food that had expired decades ago. A faded calendar on the wall still hung open to May of 1997. We moved through the downstairs rooms very slowly. The living room still had furniture draped in dusty yellowed sheets. The fireplace was still filled with crumbling gray ash, as if the last fire had just burned out. Family photos were still hanging in the hallway, showing people smiling at barbecues and dressed up for Christmas. Honestly, I got the chills looking at those photos. There was something incredibly eerie about seeing happy family photos in a house that had been abandoned for so long. Some of the photos had faded so badly from the sun that the people's faces looked almost ghostly white. Upstairs is where things started to feel really off. The first bedroom we entered had a perfectly made bed, but all of the dresser drawers were pulled wide open and completely empty. In another bedroom, the entire floor was covered in old newspapers from 1997. Each newspaper was folded open to the classified ads section. I did not think much of it until I noticed the dates on the papers. They were all from the exact same week in July of 1997, and every single circled ad was for private buyers looking for quiet, cash-only transactions. The master bedroom was the strangest of all. The heavy curtains were drawn shut, but when I pulled them back, I realized the windows had been boarded over from the inside with thick wooden planks. The closet door had a large, rusted padlock on it, and the hardwood floor in front of it was heavily scratched, as if someone had tried to drag something incredibly heavy out of the closet but could not lift it. Ryan wanted to try and force the lock open, but I talked him out of it. We did not have any tools with us, and I did not want to get caught breaking things in a place where we were not supposed to be. Ryan then suggested we check out the basement before we left. The basement door was located in a narrow hallway off the kitchen. When we opened it, a wave of damp, cool air came up that smelled strongly of mildew. The stairs were wooden, and each step creaked like it might give way under our feet. The basement was massive, with thick stone walls and wooden shelves running along one side. Most of the shelves were completely empty, except for a few rusted tin cans and a broken lantern. But in the center of the basement, illuminated in our flashlight beams, we saw 5 mismatched chairs arranged in a perfect circle. Unlike everything else in the house, these chairs were not dusty at all. The seats looked like they had been cleaned and used very recently. I was about to whisper something to Ryan when we both suddenly froze. Somewhere on the floor above us, a door closed. The sound was clear as day, and it was immediately followed by the sound of heavy footsteps crossing the wooden floor. We turned off our flashlights instantly and stood there in the pitch blackness, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps paused, and then they started again, moving slowly toward the hallway directly above the basement. My heart was pounding so hard I was worried whoever was up there would hear it. We had not seen any other cars outside, and we had not heard a single sound since we got here. Whoever was up there had not made a sound until now. The footsteps stopped again, this time directly above the basement door. And then, the sound of the metal door handle rattling made my blood run cold. Ryan grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the far end of the basement. There was a small ground-level window that was broken and partially covered by a rotting shutter. It was barely big enough for a person to fit through, but we did not care. I went first, scraping my jacket against the broken glass and dropping down into the damp dirt outside. Ryan crawled out right behind me. We sprinted into the safety of the trees, not looking back until we were deep in the woods. When I finally risked a glance back over my shoulder, I saw the basement door was wide open, and there was a tall, still figure standing on the porch. They were too far away to make out any details, but their head was tilted slightly to the side, as if they were watching us run. We did not stop running until we reached our car. We were so disturbed that we barely even spoke on the drive home. That night, I just kept replaying the entire experience in my head, from the clean circle of chairs to the footsteps to the locked closet and that horrifying figure on the porch. A couple of weeks later, Ryan called me. He had made a post in a local Facebook group asking if anyone knew anything about the history of that house. An older man had responded, saying that there had been numerous sightings of a strange figure in that house over the years. Most people assumed it was just a squatter. But that explanation did not make any sense when we thought about the perfect, clean circle of 5 chairs in the basement. Whatever is going on in that house, I am just incredibly glad that Ryan and I managed to get out of there in one piece. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. When I was growing up, the attic in our family home always scared me much more than the basement did. I know that for most people, the basement is the ultimate source of childhood nightmares. It is dark, damp, and usually buried underground. But for me, there was just something about our attic that really got to me. If I had to guess why, I would say it was because our attic was slightly unconventional compared to what you are probably picturing right now. For starters, it was surprisingly spacious. Most attics are typically cramped, dusty, and congested, which makes perfect sense for storage. But our attic was built in such a way that you did not ever have to crouch when you were up there. You could walk around completely upright without any issue. Now you might think that having all that extra space would imply we used it more often, the same way anyone would take advantage of excess room in their house. But that was not the case at all. I am not really sure why, but my parents treated it like a glorified storage room. That was its sole purpose. Thinking about it now, they honestly avoided going up there as much as possible. The other thing about our attic was that it had so many odd nooks and crannies built into it. What I mean by that is the entire space was broken up by heavy wooden support beams and small, sudden changes in the elevation of the floor. It was almost like walking through a makeshift maze. These beams were of completely uneven thickness, and there was absolutely no pattern to where they appeared. The result of this strange architecture was that you could not stand in any one place up there and have a clear line of sight from one end of the attic to the other. There was always something blocking your view, and the uneven flooring was a total nightmare. The floor was not completely boarded over, leaving exposed ceiling joists and thick layers of pink fiberglass insulation in between. You could genuinely injure yourself up there if you were not paying close attention to where you stepped. My dad used to joke that one day one of us would slip on one of those joists, fall straight through the insulation, and puncture a giant hole in the living room ceiling below. So you can easily imagine why an attic like that would be deeply unsettling to a little kid. The maze-like quality of the space was what freaked me out the most. I really did not like the feeling of not being able to see the attic in its entirety. Every single time I had to go up there, I felt this overwhelming sensation that someone or something was hiding just out of sight, right behind one of those thick wooden beams. But anyway, what I am about to tell you happened so long ago that I do not have a ton of other clear memories from that specific period in my life. For whatever reason, however, this particular memory is so incredibly vivid that it feels like a sharp thorn protruding into what was otherwise a fantastic and peaceful childhood. It happened during the middle of the school week, which I remember clearly because I had classes that day. I am not entirely sure how old I was at the time, but I was in middle school, probably around 12 or 13. I woke up one ordinary morning and immediately noticed that my feet were incredibly dirty. The bottoms of my feet were completely gray and grimy, and there was this fine layer of dark grit stuck between my toes that I could not easily explain. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring down at my feet, trying to figure out what on earth had happened. I had not gone outside the night before. I had not done anything unusual or messy. I had just gone to bed at my normal time, fallen asleep in my clean room, and somehow woken up with absolutely filthy feet. Being a typical kid, I did not give the situation too much thought beyond that initial confusion. I just hopped into the bathroom, washed my feet off in the bathtub, and went about my normal school day. But things only started to escalate from there. A few days later, I came home from school and found a strange cardboard box sitting in my bedroom that absolutely did not belong there. It was a small, dusty box filled to the brim with old, faded family photographs. It was the exact kind of box that my parents kept stored away deep in the attic. I had absolutely no memory of going upstairs to get it, let alone bringing it down to my room. When I asked my mom about it, she just naturally assumed that I had been rummaging through the attic for some reason and had forgotten to put it back. I tried to tell her that I had not done any such thing, but she did not seem very concerned. She just picked up the box, took it back upstairs to the attic, and that was that. Then it happened again. Just a few days after the photo box incident, I woke up another morning and found an old, heavy brass lamp sitting directly on my desk. It was this incredibly ugly, outdated brass thing that I only vaguely recognized from seeing it stored away in the attic years prior. This time, I was absolutely positive that I had not brought that lamp down myself. I would have definitely remembered carrying a heavy, awkward metal lamp through the dark hallway of my house in the middle of the night. But there it was, sitting on my desk as if it had been there all along. That was the moment when all the pieces of the puzzle started clicking into place. The dirty feet, the dusty box of photographs, and now the heavy brass lamp on my desk. I was not just sleepwalking around my room. I was sleepwalking all the way up to the attic. The realization did not scare me right away, but it made me feel incredibly strange. The mere idea that I was unconsciously navigating that dangerous maze of wooden beams and uneven flooring in the absolute pitch black, completely unaware of what I was doing, was deeply unsettling. I decided to tell my parents about it, and they reacted exactly how you would expect typical parents to react. They told me that sleepwalking was completely normal for kids my age, that lots of children did it, and that I would probably just grow out of it in a few months. I would not exactly say they were dismissive, but they certainly were not overly concerned either. To them, it was just a phase, but to me, it felt like something much more ominous. After that conversation, I started completely dreading bedtime. I would lie awake in bed for hours after I was supposed to be asleep, fighting the urge to close my eyes because I was absolutely terrified of what my body might do once I lost consciousness. Of course, I could not fight off sleep forever. Every single morning, the very first thing I would do upon waking up was frantically check the bottoms of my feet to see if they were dirty. If they were clean, I knew it had been a good night. But if they were gray and covered in grit, I knew it had been a bad night. Fortunately, they were usually clean, but those few times when they were dirty really started to get to me. There was no denying the fact that I was definitely going up to the attic on a regular basis, and the absolute worst part about the whole thing was that I had no memory of it whatsoever. For all I knew, I was spending more time wandering around up in that dark attic than I was sleeping in my own bed. The fear I felt during that period of my life was a slow, creeping dread that never truly went away. It was awful, but absolutely nothing compared to what happened next. I woke up one night, only to quickly realize it was not morning at all. It was still pitch black outside. It took my brain a few seconds to process what was happening, but I realized I was not lying down in my warm bed. In fact, I was not even lying down at all. I was standing completely upright. That was the very first thing my senses registered. I was standing straight up in complete impenetrable darkness, and I had absolutely no idea where I was. For a few terrifying seconds, my brain could not even begin to process my surroundings. But then the sudden recognition hit me like a physical blow. I was standing in the middle of the attic. The wave of pure terror that washed over me was so intense that I almost could not draw a single breath into my lungs. I was in the attic, in the dead of night, surrounded by pitch black darkness. I could not see a single thing. I could not see the support beams. I could not see the storage boxes. I could not see the exit hatch. Nothing. It was just absolute, heavy blackness. To make matters even worse, because of the maze-like layout of the room, I had absolutely no idea where in the attic I was actually standing. I stood there frozen for what felt like an eternity, far too scared to take even a single step. It felt like sleep paralysis, but multiplied by 100. I knew the general layout of the attic, but only vaguely from the few times I had been up there during the day. I also knew that there were dangerous obstacles and exposed joists everywhere. The idea of trying to find my way back to the exit hatch in complete darkness was almost unthinkable, but I knew I could not just stand there frozen forever. So I slowly and painfully started to move. I was so incredibly scared that I actually started to cry, but I forced myself to weep silently. The tears were just flooding down my face, and I felt this intense, primal instinct that if I made too much noise, something terrible was going to get me. It was easily the most terrified I have ever been in my entire life. As I crept forward, I could not shake this horrible, distinct feeling that I was not actually alone up there. I do not know what was giving me that thought, but I could feel another presence in the room with me, somewhere further back in the darkness. And right as that thought crossed my mind, I actually heard something. There was a soft, distinct thud from somewhere in the darkness behind me. It honestly sounded exactly like a footstep, or like someone slowly shifting their weight on the old wooden floorboards. I kept moving as fast as I safely could, but then I heard the exact same sound twice more. Both times, the sound seemed to be coming from a slightly different spot in the room, as if whatever was making the noise was slowly following me through the maze of beams. At that point, I was convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was another person up there in the dark. I do not know how long it actually took me to stumble across the exit hatch, but my hand finally brushed against the wooden frame, and I found it. I practically threw myself down the ladder, ran straight to my parents' bedroom, and woke them up. I was full-on sobbing at that point, completely unable to hold my terror in any longer. I hysterically told them exactly what had happened, how I had woken up standing in the dark, and how I had to feel my way back to the hatch. I also told them about the distinct footsteps I had heard, and I insisted that there was someone else hiding up in our attic. I fully expected my dad to spring out of bed, grab his baseball bat, and rush up there to investigate. But he did not. In fact, neither of them took me seriously at all. My mom just wrapped her arms around me, hugged me tight, and told me that everything was going to be okay. She explained that sleepwalking can cause incredibly realistic and vivid nightmares, and that waking up in the middle of it must have just confused my senses. My dad offered to put a physical lock on the outside of the attic hatch if it would make me feel safer, and I immediately said yes. But I knew what I had heard. I kept insisting that they had to at least check the attic, and my dad finally sighed and agreed just to calm me down. As I stood there watching my dad slowly climb up the ladder into the dark attic, there was a part of my young mind that genuinely believed he was not going to make it back down. But not even 2 minutes later, he was already climbing back down the wooden ladder. He looked at me, told me there was absolutely nothing up there, and told me to go back to sleep. So, that is what I did. But lying awake in my bed for the rest of that night was easily the worst experience of my life. Strangely enough, after that terrifying night, the sleepwalking stopped completely. I am still not sure what I would have done if it had continued. And speaking of that night, I have never been able to fully accept the logical sleepwalking explanation my parents gave me. I know that sleepwalking is a real, scientifically documented thing that happens to people, and there is nothing supernatural about it. But there is a part of my mind that just cannot let it go. The way I always ended up in the exact same place, the attic, and never anywhere else in the house. The way I was apparently capable of flawlessly navigating a complex maze of uneven joists and dangerous obstacles in complete darkness without ever hurting myself. And most of all, the footsteps I heard while I was standing there in the dark. I still believe to this day that there was something up there with me. I really do. What it actually was, I have no idea. I am obviously a lot older now, and I have brought up these concerns to my parents several times over the years, but they always give me the exact same dismissive answers. It almost feels as if they themselves do not want to think about what might have actually been up there, which also does not make much sense to me. I doubt I will ever get the real answers I am looking for. Now, this next event happened when I was about 14 or 15 years old. My family lived in this very old historical house that had been passed down through our family for generations. My dad had grown up in that exact house, and his parents had lived there before him. I do not live there anymore, but I still find myself thinking about what happened there from time to time. Like most old family homes, this house had a large attic. It was basically a giant graveyard for stuff that nobody in the family wanted to deal with. It was packed with old broken furniture, boxes of God knows what, and massive containers of Christmas decorations. That last item was the only reason anyone ever set foot up there. We went up once a year right before the holidays to get the decorations, and then once more after the holidays to put everything back. This story happened around Christmas time, but the holiday itself has basically nothing to do with what actually occurred. That particular Christmas, my dad decided that I was finally old enough to go up and grab the heavy decoration boxes myself. He gave me the whole rundown before I went up. He explained which boxes to look for, mentioned that the Christmas lights were in a separate plastic container near the back wall, and I just nodded along as if I were paying close attention. But I was not really. I was a teenager, and my mind was focused on something else entirely. Once we finished talking, he sent me up to the attic. I climbed the squeaky wooden ladder and pulled down the little metal chain to turn on the single dusty light bulb hanging from the ceiling. I remember standing there, looking around at the cluttered space, and realizing that I genuinely could not remember the last time I had actually been up there. But then, I realized I had a major problem. I had absolutely no idea what my dad had just told me to grab. I could not remember a single one of his instructions, and there was absolutely no way I was going back downstairs to ask him to repeat himself. My dad had a very strict policy about that. He would get legitimately angry if you made him say the same thing twice. So, rather than face his temper, I just started opening random cardboard boxes that looked like they might contain holiday decorations. I moved things around for probably 20 minutes, and in the process, I ended up making a complete and total mess of the entire attic. I did eventually find the correct Christmas boxes, which spared me the immense anxiety of having to go back downstairs empty-handed. But the attic itself was completely disorganized at that point. I made about 4 or 5 trips up and down the ladder, hauling the heavy boxes to the living room. Once I was finally finished, I decided to go back up for one last look, just to make sure I had not missed anything important. I knew I was eventually going to have to clean up the mess I made, which I was not looking forward to at all. As I was looking around the chaotic attic, bracing myself for all the heavy lifting I was going to have to do to put things back in order. I noticed something that looked completely out of place. In one of the far back corners of the room, tucked away behind a stack of old furniture that I had just moved, there was a box I had never seen before. It was solid black, and it did not look like a flimsy cardboard box. It was made of a much sturdier, heavy-duty material, almost like an old document box or one of those fireproof security safes. Despite its sturdy construction, it somehow looked significantly older than everything else stored in the attic. Being a naturally curious teenager, I obviously went over and opened it. Inside the box were papers, dozens and dozens of them. It was an alarming amount of written material. There were old notebooks, loose sheets of yellowed paper, hand-drawn maps, and even a few pages of what looked like classical sheet music. But the one thing that every single one of these items shared was that they were completely covered in frantic, tight handwriting. The maps, the notebooks, even the margins of the sheet music were crammed with words. I sat down on a dusty trunk and started going through the papers, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. The handwriting was incredibly difficult to decipher at first, but as my eyes adjusted to the sharp, hurried lettering, I was slowly able to understand. None of the pages were dated, but they seemed to be stacked in chronological order, with the older, more legible entries on top, and the newer, more chaotic entries near the bottom. I was so deeply intrigued by this hidden box, and the strange papers inside, that I told myself I would not go back downstairs until I had read through every single page. The earliest entries in the notebooks were honestly pretty boring. They detailed simple things like the daily weather, mundane household tasks, and random thoughts about the writer's day. It closely resembled a highly disorganized personal diary. From these early pages, I was very quickly able to gather that whoever was responsible for writing all of this was someone who had previously lived in our house a very long time ago. But as I kept reading further down the stack, the entries started getting progressively weirder. For starters, the physical handwriting became noticeably more chaotic, messy, and illegible, which was the first real indication that something was wrong. But that was absolutely nothing compared to the actual content of what I was reading. Whoever wrote these pages had become completely and totally obsessed with our attic. They began repeatedly measuring the entire space. They documented the physical dimensions of the attic over and over again, constantly comparing their measurements to the actual footprint of the house on the floors below. According to their frantic mathematical equations, the attic was significantly smaller than it should have been. The writer claimed that there was a massive discrepancy along one of the back walls, a space of several feet that simply could not be accounted for. They went into extreme, painstaking detail about this one specific wall, noting every tiny crack, indent, and nail mark. Every square inch of what made that wall distinctive was cataloged in the notes. The diary entries got even more frantic after that. Based on what I was reading, it became clear that the writer was spending hours at a time up in the attic, sometimes even sleeping up there on the hard floorboards. They claimed they had started hearing strange sounds coming from directly behind that missing wall space. They described these sounds as low scratching noises, heavy breathing, and shifting weights. To make it even more chilling, there were precise timestamps written next to some of these descriptions. One entry read, 2:14 a.m., loud scratching for approximately 3 minutes. The more I read, the more I realized that I was holding a first-hand, highly detailed account of someone's complete descent into absolute madness. There was nothing coherent about the writing toward the end. I did not believe a single word of what they were writing, thinking it was just the ramblings of a very sick person. But then the papers got even worse. The final pages of the journal did not contain sentences anymore. They were just covered in thousands of tiny tally marks. Rows and rows and rows of them, counting something that was never identified. And then the entries just abruptly stopped. Either the person had suddenly stopped writing, or that was simply as far as the record went. By the time I finished reading the very last page, I was genuinely shaking. The air in the attic suddenly felt freezing cold. I wanted nothing more than to pack everything back into the black box, put it exactly where I found it, go back downstairs, and completely purge the memory of reading it from my brain. But there was one thing I knew I had to do first. My eyes naturally drifted straight to the back wall that the writer had been so completely fixated on, and the exact moment I realized there were actual markings, cracks, and deep indents in that wall, I started feeling physically sick to my stomach. I walked over to examine the wall closely, and some of the physical cracks in the plaster seemed to line up almost perfectly with the hand-drawn sketches in the journal. It was a type of deep, psychological fear that I had never experienced before. I can only describe it as the overwhelming feeling of being watched, but from multiple different angles at the exact same time. I could suddenly picture the writer of those journals clawing at this exact wall in a fit of pure lunacy. It felt as if he were standing right there in the room with me. Suddenly, I did not want to spend another single second in that attic. I grabbed the heavy black box, climbed down the ladder as fast as I could, and went straight to my dad. When I showed him the papers, he was just as shocked and confused as I was. He had absolutely no idea what any of it meant, and he confirmed that he had never seen the black box before in his life. He looked closely at the handwriting and told me he was 100% sure it was not his father's writing, which meant that whoever wrote those entries must have been someone who lived in our house even before my grandfather. The problem was, both of my grandparents were already gone, and my dad knew absolutely nothing about the people who had owned the house before them. My dad decided to go up to the attic to investigate, and to my surprise, he told me to come with him. I felt significantly safer having him there, so I did not argue. I stood off to the side while my dad inspected the back wall much more meticulously than I had, using some of the sketches from the journal as a direct guide. After a few minutes of feeling around the wood and plaster, he suddenly froze, deep in thought. I thought he was about to give up, but he turned to me and calmly said that he was going to rip the wall down. I was actually incredibly shocked by his decision, but I was in no position to oppose him. He went down to the garage, gathered some heavy tools, and we went back up. He began tearing into the plaster and wood with a crowbar, and what we saw behind that wall was absolutely shocking. The writer of those journals had been completely right. There was a hidden space back there, and it was a lot of space. It was several feet deep, and it ran the entire length of the attic wall. But that was not even the worst part. The wooden walls of this hidden chamber were completely covered in strange markings. There were thick black lines, bizarre symbols, and geometric shapes that I did not recognize at all. They covered almost every single visible surface of the hidden room. I do not really know how to describe them, but those marks were deeply unsettling to look at. They did not look like any kind of writing or language. The implication of this discovery was actually much worse than the symbols themselves, because my dad and I very quickly realized that there was absolutely no alternative entrance to that hidden space. There were no doors, no hidden latches, and no openings from the outside of the house. So, how could anyone have ever gotten in there to paint those symbols on the walls in the first place? My dad and I just stood there in absolute silence, completely overwhelmed by what we were looking at. Eventually, once the initial shock of the discovery began to wear off, we confirmed that the hidden space was entirely empty, with the sole exception of the bizarre symbols drawn all over the walls. But the mystery did not end there. The more we sat down and thought about the entire situation, the less sense it made. At one point, my dad pointed out a major flaw in our theories. He noted that whoever wrote those frantic notebooks, whoever had been so deeply obsessed with documenting every tiny detail, did not seem like the type of person who would neatly organize their mad ramblings in a sturdy box and tuck it safely away in a corner. Compulsive, manic behavior usually does not end with tidy archival work. That thought had not occurred to me until that exact moment, but I had to admit that he was completely right. The neat preservation of those mad journals could only mean one thing. Someone else had found the writings, compiled them together, and hidden them away. My dad was 2 steps ahead of me. I watched as this unreadable, heavy look washed over his face. It was a mix of deep sadness and confusion. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he softly said that it must have been his father, my grandfather. He must have found the writings at some point, gathered them up, and stored them in that black box to keep the secret safe. There really was not much we could do after that. My dad admitted to me years later that the thought of his father withholding something so massive from him, and why he would even do such a thing in the first place, was something that would eat at his mind forever. And I really do not blame him. As for me, I still do not know what to make of any of it. It happened so long ago that I suppose it does not really matter anymore. But if I think about it for long enough, I can still easily freak myself out. I do not think anyone can truly rationalize what we found. There is no reasonable, logical explanation for it. I used to try to convince myself that whoever had written those entries was the same person who had scratched up and painted that hidden space, and that they were probably just suffering from severe mental illness. But there were details written in those pages that someone could only possibly know if they were inside the space, after the wall was already built and sealed. But with the wall being completely sealed, there was physically no way into that space. It truly makes absolutely no sense. My dad refused to let me keep the black box when we ultimately moved out of that house years later. For all I know, that box is still sitting up there in that dark attic, waiting for the next owners to find it. All I know for sure is that this is a mystery I will take with me to my grave. To give you some more context about why these spaces can be so unsettling, you have to understand my own relationship with old houses. I have been a heavy smoker for much longer than I care to admit to anyone. It has been about 23 years now, give or take a few. At this point in my life, smoking is less of a bad habit and much more of a personal daily ritual. It is just something to keep my hands busy during stressful moments, or a way to officially mark the end of a long, tiring day. But there is one strict rule that I have always kept. I absolutely refuse to smoke inside my home. My parents were the exact same way when they lived in this house, even though my dad would occasionally smoke heavy cigars on very special occasions. I ended up inheriting this entire house from them about 4 years ago, when they finally decided to pull the trigger on their retirement plans and move all the way down to Florida. They had been talking about making that move for years, and I think they just really needed to know that the family house would be in good, responsible hands before they could actually bring themselves to leave it behind. At the time, I was recently divorced, living in a rental apartment that was way too small and honestly pretty depressing, so the timing of the inheritance worked out perfectly for me. My only real complaint about the place now is that the house actually feels way too big for one person, which probably sounds like an absurd thing to complain about, until you realize that it is a massive 3-story colonial home, and I live here completely alone. The house also comes with this beautiful, sprawling backyard. It is probably close to a full acre of land if you count the heavily wooded part at the very back of the property. Over the last few years, I have gotten into the habit of taking these long, late-night walks out there in the dark while I smoke my last cigarette of the day. It is incredibly peaceful out there. There are not any close neighbors nearby to bother me, and the only light source in the entire yard is the faint glow coming from the windows of my own house. So usually it is just me, the sound of the crickets, and whatever small animals are rustling around in the trees. I usually do one full, slow loop around the entire property line, which takes about 10 minutes if I am not rushing. It has truly become my personal version of daily meditation, or perhaps just my convenient excuse to stand outside and smoke in absolute peace and quiet. But there is one very important thing that needs to be known about this property. The house itself is incredibly old. It has extremely creaky wooden floors, drafty windows, and thin walls. It is practically impossible for anyone to walk around in there without making a significant amount of noise. The house also has a large attic, which is accessed through one of those wooden pull-down ladders located in the second-floor hallway ceiling. It is essentially just a big, dusty storage room. I only ever go up there when I need to grab seasonal decorations or store some of my parents' old belongings that I do not know what to do with, but cannot bring myself to throw away. There is also a tiny, narrow window located on the back wall of the attic, which overlooks the entire backyard. It is maybe only a foot wide, original to the structure of the house, and it honestly looks a bit out of place against the rest of the architecture. I have looked up at that tiny attic window hundreds of times during my nightly walks in the yard. It had never caught my attention or seemed unusual before. That is, until about 3 weeks ago. I was doing my usual nightly loop, about halfway through a cigarette, when I happened to casually glance up at the dark house. I do not even know why I looked up. I was not thinking about the attic or anything creepy. My eyes just naturally drifted upward. and for a split second, I could have sworn I saw something move directly behind that little window. I stopped walking immediately and just stood frozen in the middle of the yard, staring intently up at the attic. The window was completely dark. There is no light source up in the attic, unless you physically carry a flashlight up there, but I was almost positive that I had seen a brief flash of movement. It looked like a dark shape passing quickly in front of the glass, or perhaps something heavy shifting in the darkness just behind it. I tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid and ridiculous. I reasoned that I had probably just seen the reflection of a passing cloud, or maybe a bat flying close to the roof. I quickly finished my cigarette, walked back inside, and tried not to think about it anymore. But the very next night, I saw it again. And this time, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind. There was definitely something moving around up there behind the glass, and it was not a mere reflection or a trick of the light. Something was physically inside my attic. My very first thought was that it had to be a wild animal. Squirrels, raccoons, and birds managed to get into old houses all the time, and I would not have been surprised at all if there was a gap somewhere in the old wooden eaves. But then, I started thinking about the sheer size of the movement I had seen. What kind of wild animal would be large enough for me to clearly see its silhouette from all the way down in the backyard? I did not like any of the logical answers I came up with. I went back inside the house, closed the door, and stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the dark hallway where the attic access hatch was located. I listened as closely as I could, but I did not hear any scratching, scurrying, or animal noises. I actually did not hear anything at all, which did make sense given how thick the attic floorboards were. I really did not want to go up there, but I knew I did not have a choice. If there was a large animal or something else living in my attic, I needed to know about it before it caused serious damage to the house. So, with a heavy sense of reluctance, I turned on my phone flashlight, reached up, and pulled down the creaky wooden ladder. It was an especially nerve-wracking situation, because the specific layout of the attic entrance meant that I would have to climb up blindly. If there was something lurking right next to the opening, I would not be able to see it until my head was already fully inside the room. I climbed up the wooden rungs slowly, trying my best to convince myself that I was not completely scared out of my mind, even though I was, and my fears were almost immediately justified. I was not even remotely prepared for the sight that greeted me when my flashlight beam swept across the room. It was not an animal that was up there, and it did not look like a normal person either. The entire attic was a complete chaotic disaster. I do not just mean that it was messy or dusty. I mean it had been violently destroyed. Every single cardboard box and plastic bin had been violently overturned, and their contents were strewn wildly across the floorboards. But I was not even thinking about the mess. All I could focus on was the thick black paint, or at least what looked exactly like black paint, that was violently smeared across every single wall and even across the ceiling. The paint was disturbingly thick, almost chunky in texture. But the absolute worst part by far was how wet and shiny it looked under my flashlight beam. It looked as if it had been smeared onto the wood only moments before I climbed up. It was actually still slowly dripping down the walls in several places, so I was 100% sure that it was fresh. That initial glimpse freaked me out so intensely that I genuinely lost my footing and almost fell straight off the ladder. I do not know why, but seeing that fresh dripping paint terrified me to the point that I felt like I could not breathe. My brain immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion. There was a dangerous, unstable person hiding inside my house. I did one incredibly quick, panicked sweep of the attic with my flashlight to make sure there was no one standing directly in front of me, and that was more than enough for me. I practically slid down the wooden ladder in my frantic rush to get back to the safety of the second floor. But in a matter of seconds, my intense fear suddenly transformed into pure hot anger. The realization that some stranger had entered my home, destroyed my family's belongings, and was actively terrorizing me made me snap. I decided that I was going to find this person, and I was going to defend myself and my home. I started tearing through the entire house, checking every single bedroom, closet, and bathroom. But as I searched, I did not find a single trace of anyone. The more I looked without finding anything, the more discouraged and panicked I became. The initial rush of adrenaline was starting to wear off, and I was becoming much more afraid again, which certainly did not help matters. I finished clearing the lower floors and went back upstairs to my own bedroom, thinking that maybe I had missed a potential hiding spot. But even after checking under the bed and behind the curtains, the room was completely empty. The moment I paused to take a deep breath and calm my racing heart, however, I heard it. There were two loud, distinct thumps, followed immediately by what sounded like something incredibly heavy being dragged slowly across the floor. The sounds were coming from directly above my head. It could only mean one thing. They were still up in the attic. How incredibly stupid of me. Whoever was up there had probably never even left the room. They had likely just been hiding silently behind one of the giant, overturned storage boxes while I did my quick flashlight sweep. I do not know where the sudden courage came from, but something inside me just snapped. This was my parents' house, a place of safety, and whoever was up there had completely violated it. Before I could talk myself out of it, I ran downstairs to the kitchen and grabbed the largest, sharpest carving knife I could find. And you best believe that I was fully ready to use it to protect myself. I ran back upstairs, stood under the hatch, and pulled the wooden ladder down once again. My hands were shaking so violently that I could barely keep a solid grip on the wooden rungs, but I forced my feet to keep climbing. And then, I just started screaming like a complete lunatic. I burst through the attic opening, yelling at the top of my lungs, waving the heavy kitchen knife around in the air like a madman. Part of it was an attempt to intimidate whoever was up there, but honestly, most of it was just pure, unadulterated fear. I stomped around the creaky floorboards as aggressively as I possibly could, kicking over empty boxes and screaming for them to show themselves. But there was absolutely no one up there. I was completely sure of it this time. My attic is not that large. It is just one big open space with no hidden rooms, so there was quite literally nowhere left for a human being to hide. There was something else up there though. Something brand new that had not been there during my first climb, and seeing it completely killed every single ounce of bravery I had managed to scrape together. There were fresh, deep scratch marks everywhere. Long, violent gouges had been carved deep into the wooden support beams and floorboards, looking exactly as if a large, powerful animal had been clawing at them with immense force. The black paint from before was still wet, but these deep scratches were layered directly over the top of the wet paint, tearing through it. After seeing those fresh gouges, I was completely done. I ran down the ladder, rushed into the first floor bathroom, locked the heavy door behind me, and frantically dialed 911. The police arrived at my house maybe 15 minutes later, which felt like hours. Two of the responding officers went upstairs with their guns drawn to thoroughly check the attic, while I waited downstairs in the kitchen with the third officer. When they finally came back down the stairs, they looked incredibly puzzled. All they could tell me was that the attic was completely empty. They also mentioned that they had checked the entire perimeter of the roof and walls, and they could not find any gaps, holes, or open windows where an animal or a person could have entered. They suggested that whoever had vandalized my property must have simply snuck out through the front or back door while I was upstairs. But I insisted to the officers that their explanation was physically impossible. The house is incredibly old and creaky, as I said before. Even the lightest step from a small person is enough to make a loud noise that echoes through the entire house. There is absolutely no way someone could have run down the stairs and out the door without me hearing them, especially since I was hyper-vigilant. But there was nothing else the officers could do, and no other explanations they could offer me. They wrote up a standard police report, told me to keep my doors locked, and they left. It has been 3 weeks since that terrifying night, and luckily there have not been any further incidents. So I suppose I have no choice but to try and believe the official story. I have to try and convince myself that some random homeless person somehow snuck into my attic, decided to vandalize it with wet paint for some unknown reason, and then managed to escape the house without making a single sound. But the problem is, I do not believe that story. I really don't. I do not know what to make of all this, but I refuse to believe that a normal human being caused all of that damage. It feels like something much worse, something far more sinister than that. I still have not been back up to the attic since that night, not even to clean up the wet paint or organize the boxes. I really do not know what to do. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. After breaking up with his first serious girlfriend when he was 21 years old, he found himself completely single for the first time in years. It was a massive lifestyle change that took a lot of getting used to. For a long time, his life had revolved around another person, and suddenly he had to figure out how to navigate the world alone. After about a year of self-reflection and adjustment, he decided it was finally time to put himself back out there and dive into the modern dating scene. Like most young adults in the digital age, he began downloading several different dating apps onto his phone. Out of all the apps he tried, OkCupid quickly became his favorite. He spent hours reading through profiles, hoping to find someone he could genuinely connect with. That was when he matched with a girl named Brenna. Looking at her profile, he felt an immediate spark. She had a wonderful biography that listed a lot of interests she shared with him, from her favorite music to her hobbies. On top of that, she was an exceptionally pretty, light-skinned black girl. They began messaging each other, and the conversation flowed incredibly well. They talked for several days, sharing stories and getting to know one another, until they both agreed it was time to meet up in person. The plan was simple. He would drive over to her house on the west side of town, pick her up, and they would head out to get some food together. He was filled with nervous excitement as he got into his car and drove across town. He pulled up to the curb in front of her house at exactly 6:30 in the evening. It was about 10 minutes after sunset, and the sky was rapidly darkening. The streetlights were starting to glow, casting long, eerie shadows across the quiet residential neighborhood. He put his car in park, picked up his phone, and sent Brenna a text message letting her know he had arrived. But she did not answer right away. He sat there in the silence of his car, staring at the screen, waiting for those little typing bubbles to appear. As the minutes ticked by, he started to feel a bit anxious, wondering if he was being stood up on his very first date after his long break. Finally, his phone buzzed with a notification. Brenna apologized for the delay, but explained that her brother was being extremely annoying and overprotective. She said her brother was insisting on walking outside to meet him before she was allowed to leave. He was frustrated. He texted back, expressing how much he did not want to deal with an overprotective family member on a first date. He just wanted a normal evening. But Brenna kept apologizing, saying her brother was forcing her hand and would not let her leave unless he met him first. Before he could type another response, the front door of the house opened. A large man stepped out onto the porch and began walking down the driveway, his eyes locked onto the car. He took a deep breath, opened his door, and stepped out onto the asphalt to meet him. As the man walked into the glow of the streetlights, he felt a sudden wave of unease. First of all, the man was absolutely massive, completely towering over him. Second, his skin was significantly darker than Brenna's. In fact, they did not look related in the slightest. Despite his growing discomfort, he put on a friendly face. The man reached out, shook his hand firmly, and introduced himself as Will. At first glance, there did not seem to be anything outwardly malicious about him. He seemed friendly enough, explaining that he just wanted to make sure his sister was going out with a trustworthy, stand-up guy. They stood in the driveway talking for a couple of minutes, and Will's behavior seemed perfectly normal. But then, Will made a request that changed everything. He asked him to step inside the house so he could meet Brenna in person before they left for their date. He hesitated, but he did not want to offend his date's family or seem rude, so he reluctantly agreed. He followed Will up the front steps and into the house. As soon as they stepped across the threshold, Will shut the heavy front door behind them, and the lock clicked into place. Will told him to wait right there in the living room while he went upstairs to fetch Brenna. As Will's footsteps faded up the stairs, he looked around the dimly lit living room, and his heart instantly sank. Sitting on the couch were two other men. Neither of them was smiling. They both turned their heads and stared at him with cold, predatory eyes. Trying to diffuse the thick tension in the room, he raised his hand and said, "What's up to them?" One of the men barely gave a slight nod, while the other remained completely motionless, his gaze locked onto him. Suddenly, Will's voice echoed down from the top of the stairs, saying he was trying to find Brenna. This made absolutely no sense. Why would he need to search for his sister in her own home? His survival instincts screamed at him to get out. He slowly turned his gaze toward the dining room adjacent to the living room. To his horror, there was a fourth man sitting silently at the dining table, staring at him. He knew he had to act immediately. Without turning his back on the three men in the room, he slowly took a step backward, reaching his hand out behind him for the front doorknob. The moment his fingers touched the cold metal, one of the men on the couch leapt to his feet and screamed for the others to grab him. He did not waste a fraction of a second. He gripped the knob, flung the door open, and sprinted down the steps toward his car. Behind him, he could hear the heavy, frantic footsteps of the men giving chase. He scrambled into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it just as the first man reached the vehicle. For several agonizing seconds, the men surrounded his car, kicking the doors and violently punching the glass, trying to shatter the windows to get to him. He threw the car into drive and slammed his foot on the accelerator, tearing down the residential street. He drove straight home, bursting through the door out of breath and trembling. He told his parents what had happened, and they were deeply shocked. They urged him to contact the police. He reported the house and the terrifying incident immediately. Luckily, an anonymous neighbor had witnessed the attack on his car and vouched for his story. The police raided the home and arrested 3 of the 4 men, including the one who called himself Will. The fourth man was never caught, leaving him to wonder what dark fate those men had planned for him. Fast forward to his next dating app experience. He decided to try again, but was far more cautious. After a couple of unsuccessful dates on Match.com, he wanted something casual, so he matched with a girl named Kylie on another app. She agreed to come over to his apartment to hang out. When she arrived, she was incredibly quiet. They hung out in his upstairs bedroom, watching television and talking. The conversation was incredibly awkward, filled with long silences. As the night went on, Kylie became completely emotionless. She stared blankly across the room and began talking slowly about very dark topics. Suddenly, she thanked him for letting her sleep over, assuming hanging out meant staying the night. Not wanting a conflict, he made a bed for her on the floor with blankets. She laid down, facing away from him, and he eventually fell asleep in the silence. In the middle of the night, he suddenly woke up. He looked down and saw the floor was empty. He turned on his lamp, but Kylie was nowhere to be found. Then he heard a low voice whispering downstairs. He quietly walked to the top of the stairs to listen. He could hear her muttering in a low tone. He went downstairs into the dark kitchen and saw Kylie sitting in a chair, staring directly at the blank wall, talking to herself. He whispered her name. She turned her head slowly, stared at him with empty eyes, and then turned back to the wall. Terrified, he ran back upstairs to his room and called his dad. On the third call, his dad answered, advising him to call 911. Suddenly, he saw Kylie's thin silhouette standing in his bedroom doorway. She stood there for 10 seconds, then shrieked and charged at him in his bed. She lunged and wrapped her hands tightly around his throat, trying to choke him. He struggled violently against her grip, his chest tightening as her cold fingers pressed into his windpipe. Using his weight and adrenaline, he managed to twist his body, break her grip, and pin her down against the mattress. He screamed into his phone, begging his father to call the police immediately. After a frantic struggle, he managed to drag the thrashing, screaming girl down the stairs and push her out of the house, just as the police cruisers pulled up, their red and blue lights flashing against the walls. The officers quickly restrained Kylie and took her away to be processed. He was left sitting on his front steps, gasping for air and trembling, fully realizing that you should always meet people from dating apps in a safe, public place first. In February of 2014, another young man had a terrifying encounter on the app Badoo. He matched with a girl named Maria. Their conversation was going great, and he asked her to hang out that night. She agreed and asked for his address. He sent it to her and asked for her number, but she went offline. He waited for hours, but she never showed up, so he finally went to sleep. The next morning, he woke up at 6:30. He checked his phone and saw messages from Maria sent in the middle of the night. At 3 in the morning, she said she was coming. At 3:20, she said she was there. At 4, she said she was watching him. Then a new message popped up asking how he had slept. He typed back, asking who this was. The reply came instantly, telling him to check his closet. He looked over and saw his closet door, which had been shut, was now cracked open. As he watched, the door slowly creaked open further. He screamed for his father and bolted from the room. He realized his dad was away, but his older brother was home. They searched the closet, but it was empty. That was when they noticed the bedroom window was unlocked and open. The stalker had watched him sleep from the closet and slipped out. The police could not track the account without a court order, leaving him in fear. It was a terrifying reminder of the dangers of sharing your address online. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. There is a unique kind of quiet that comes with a heavy snowfall. In my small suburban neighborhood in southern Quebec, that quiet usually feels very peaceful. But for me, that silence is always there. I have a hearing disability that has made me hard of hearing for most of my life. I have learned to navigate the world a little differently because of it, relying heavily on my other senses. Still, I look back on what happened to me about a year ago, and I constantly wonder what could have happened, and what I should have done differently. It was right after the holiday season, and I was finally settling back down from traveling and all the get-togethers with family and friends. My quiet neighborhood borders a thick forest, and since most of the residents know each other, it has a warm, safe atmosphere. During the winter, I love to take my dog Monty for walks in those local woods. He is a Rottweiler Husky mix, which is perfect for me since I enjoy going for runs from time to time. The forest has several trails, none of which are challenging. On this specific afternoon in February, I had just finished having a late lunch and decided to take Monty out. As usual, Monty went absolutely ballistic when we turned the corner of my street towards the forest entrance. It was relatively cold, and a fresh blanket of snow had fallen overnight, creating a blank canvas. There were already a few yellow patches and boot prints near the entrance, signaling that some neighbors had taken their dogs out earlier. Most people like to walk before noon because the winter sun sets around 4 in the afternoon, so I did not expect to see anyone else out at that time. After walking for around 30 minutes, we came to a fork in the path. I noticed that one of the paths had not been walked yet, so feeling adventurous, I decided to take it. I had a solid memory of the trails, so I knew exactly where I was going. The trail led to a clearing, which was great since I wanted to check out the native birds with the binoculars I had gotten for Christmas. I remember scanning the tree line in the distance until I saw a strange shape. When I focused my binoculars, I saw a blue tarp and what looked to be a makeshift shelter. As curious as I was, it was getting dark, so I turned around and started walking back. Monty ran up ahead, but something seemed off in his behavior. He was much more alert and was sniffing the trail more than he normally would. When I looked down, my eyes widened. There was a set of footprints in the snow, much larger than my own. I turned my boots over out of sheer confusion to compare them. The prints were different, which left me with even more questions. There were no other forks in the trail, so whoever took it had to have passed me at some point. I figured they must have passed me while I was using my binoculars. At the time, it seemed like the most logical explanation, so I tried not to overthink it. At this point, it was significantly darker outside, but I could still make out my surroundings. As we were walking back, Monty stopped abruptly and started barking relentlessly in my direction. As I turned around, that is when I saw him. There was a man probably around 6 feet 4 inches tall, wearing charcoal-colored snow pants and a white camo jacket, standing only about a meter away from me. He did not make any movements towards me. He just stood there with his hands in his coat pockets. I did not recognize him, so I assumed he must have been a hiker from out of town. He looked like he was muttering something to me, but I could not read his lips due to the lack of lighting and my hearing disability. I also did not know if he was speaking English or French, which are both common in Quebec. I felt like an idiot for not bringing my phone with me, so I ended up trying to gesture to him that I was hard of hearing and that it was getting late. I got back home around 4:30, and by then, it was completely dark out. I followed my standard night routine, not really thinking much about the encounter, but in the middle of the night, something happened that still shakes me to this day. I woke up suddenly to Monty licking my hand. I checked my phone, and to my surprise, it was 3 in the morning. I noticed a text message from my neighbor asking if everything was all right. The message was a few minutes old and said Monty had been barking like he was possessed. I looked up to find that Monty was no longer in my room. I walked downstairs to find him barking hysterically at the glass patio door. As I approached, my vision was still blurry. I tried to focus my eyes when the backyard motion sensor light suddenly turned on. At that moment, my heart sank. The man from the forest was standing right there in my backyard. I stepped away from the door and texted 911 as fast as I could. I ran up to my room with Monty and grabbed the machete from under my bed. I am a shorter woman, and although I have a background in martial arts, I know very well that the best move in a fight is to not fight at all. I sat there in my room guarding Monty and myself, waiting for the police. With my heart beating out of my chest, I sat opposite the door with Monty by my side. It did not last long before Monty sprang up and began barking violently at the bedroom door. My hands were sweating profusely as I watched a shadow cast from underneath the door. The movement suggested the man was seconds from breaking in. Those had to be the longest minutes of my life. Luckily for me, the door never opened. When the police arrived, they searched the property and found the glass on the patio door had been completely smashed. The gate in my backyard was open, leading to the forest, which is where they believe the man disappeared to. I let them know about the shelter, and then stayed with a family friend for a few days. Ever since that day, I decided to stick to the main roads when walking Monty, trying not to think about what might have happened. If you think that forest encounter was terrifying, what happened to 2 young sisters in Illinois will make you lock your doors twice tonight. My name is Ember, and I am 16 years old. I live with my younger sister Kate, who is 15, and our parents. Our dad works for a deforestation group about 30 minutes from our house. It was a completely normal morning on December 5th, as my sister and I were getting ready to go out to the movies. We decided to go watch a somewhat new horror movie, Terrifier 3, which had some Christmas elements included in it. We knew the movie was rated 18+, but nobody paid much attention to our age, since we both looked older than we actually were anyway. We made our way to the theater and easily got in thanks to our appearance. However, halfway through the film, as everyone was eagerly anticipating the next scene, my phone suddenly buzzed loudly enough for the whole theater to hear. It completely ruined the vibe of the movie, and I could feel everyone turning toward me with highly annoyed looks on their faces. Embarrassed, my sister and I quickly scurried out of the row, and in my rush, I actually ended up tripping, which was incredibly embarrassing. Once we made it out of the theater lobby, I checked my phone to see who had been calling me. It was my dad. Instead of calling him back, I immediately received a text message from his number. The message said something like, "Hey, would you mind bringing me some lunch since the small cafe in the woods is shut today?" I looked over at Kate, and she looked back at me, a little confused, but neither of us second-guessed the message, since it seemed like a perfectly normal request. We arrived back home, packed up some food for him, and took my car down to the woods where he was working. I had always loved those woods and never felt uneasy there because the area was large, peaceful, and beautifully secluded. The scenery was amazing, featuring a steep hill that led down to a quiet lake that was perfect for fishing and photos. After a while, Kate and I got out of the car and began walking down the snowy path through the woods. I took out my phone to call my dad to let him know we were there, but he did not pick up. Confused, I looked over at Kate, who was just as puzzled as I was. Why would he not respond to our call when he had just texted us while we were at the movies? I decided to text him instead, reminding him that we were currently in the woods to deliver his lunch. After a few moments, I saw the 3 little dots appear on my screen, showing that he was typing. He responded by telling us to walk down the small hill and wait for him at the lake, which we immediately did. The sun was slowly setting since it was winter, meaning the sunset came much earlier than usual. The sky had a beautiful radiant orange glow over the hills. Snapping out of my thoughts, Kate suddenly pointed down to the lake where a man dressed in black was sitting on the wooden deck by the water with his back turned to us. We both assumed it was our dad. We walked down a bit more and stopped a little behind him. I called out his name, but he did not move or react. Kate suddenly grew very uneasy and her anxious attitude made the entire scene feel extremely eerie. Slowly, I reached out and pulled off the hood he was wearing, which revealed a man who was definitely not our dad. Kate and I shrieked in terror as he turned around and began waving my dad's phone around like a maniac, smiling wildly as if he was happy to see us so scared. I blurted out, asking him why he was using our dad's phone, but he did not respond at all. Instead, he suddenly lunged forward and grabbed Kate's arm as she screamed in terror. Luckily, I was strong enough to pull her away from his grip, and we both started running back up the hill as fast as we possibly could. The adrenaline pushed through us so much that I had never seen either of us run that fast before. Behind me, I could hear heavy stomping footsteps getting closer, so I knew we were actively being chased. I did not dare to turn around. Finally, we reached the safety of my car. I slammed the door shut and locked it just as the man came up to my window, and then he suddenly crouched down out of sight. Terrified, I put the car in reverse and sped away back home. When we arrived home, my dad and mom were both sitting there in the living room. We arrived panting, completely out of breath, and frantically explained the whole situation to them. My dad was absolutely furious and explained that his phone had been stolen out of his truck while he was working, which was why he had decided to come back home early. He realized the man must have taken his phone and messaged us. My dad immediately called the police and filed a report. They used the tracking number to locate the device, which was still sitting on the wooden deck by the lake, and they eventually returned the phone to my dad. They told us there was not much else they could do since the phone had already been found, and the suspect was gone. I honestly thought this was the absolute end of it, but I would not be telling this story if it was. 6 hours later, around 1 in the morning, I got a text from an unknown number. The message said, "I like that your house is lit only by your bedroom television." I immediately went completely cold and pale. I paused the television and heard a distinct rustling sound directly outside my window. My room was on the second floor. I shut my phone and listened closely. Slowly, I peeked through the blinds and saw the man standing there, smiling, with a gun pointed directly at my window. I screamed and pulled away, just as the glass shattered everywhere across my room. My parents ran in, followed closely by Kate. I screamed for them to crouch down and told them the man was outside with a gun. When my dad went to check, the man was already gone. Then we suddenly heard another loud bang and more glass breaking downstairs in the kitchen. We ran and locked ourselves in my parents' bedroom as Kate called 911. My mom hugged us as we cried in absolute fear. Throughout the whole situation, I kept wondering how he had managed to find out exactly where we lived. A few moments later, the police arrived and searched the entire house, but nobody was there. Kate and I explained the situation again, and one of the officers suggested they check my car. Surprisingly, a small electronic tracking tag was found placed deep inside my tire well, which perfectly explained how the man knew where we lived, and why he had crouched down before I sped out of the woods. The police told us they would patrol the streets and do everything they could to find him. A few months later, he still had not been found, but he never returned. My family is still traumatized, and I feel stupid for not being alarmed when he only responded through texts, but I will definitely be more careful from now on. Our final story takes us back to the freezing winter of 2021, during the height of the pandemic. One word to describe my day back then was hectic. Work was a complete disaster. Since it was prime pandemic times, I was working entirely from home, which meant my schedule was always all over the place. I was supposed to be meeting with my extended family upstate for the holidays, but I ended up getting stuck on a nearly 3-hour Zoom meeting for work. By the time I finally managed to log off, it was a whole hour and a half after everyone else had already arrived at my parents' house. And that did not even include the next 2 hours or so that the long trek up to their place would take me in my car. Before leaving, I filled up 2 large cups of coffee in my kitchen to take with me. I knew I would need every single drop of caffeine to make it through the drive. The second I opened my front door, however, I realized this drive was going to be much more of a disaster than I had originally anticipated. The snow and wind had already picked up significantly since earlier that evening, and the streets were barely even plowed. The ground had at least 2 feet of snow already, and the weather forecast said it was supposed to keep snowing like this for a majority of the night. Because of the terrible conditions, I was forced to drive under 25 miles per hour on most of the residential roads. My car at the time was a really old, crappy Hyundai, which was not ideal for extreme weather conditions at all. It did not have anti-lock brakes either, making every stop a guessing game. I am usually a pretty fast driver though, so when I finally managed to get on the highway, I raised my speed to 70 miles per hour. It was probably a lot faster than was safe for the current road conditions, but I was desperate to get to my destination. I finally arrived at my parents' house around 9 o'clock. They had already begun dinner without me, but thankfully they were not too far along, so I was able to join in. After a few drinks and sharing some holiday gifts, I started to completely lose track of time. I got so caught up in seeing all of my relatives, whom I had not spoken to in a while, that I ended up basically forgetting that I still had a long drive home ahead of me, even as most of my family members had started to say their goodbyes and leave. Once I finally got back into my car to head home, it was past midnight, and at least another foot of fresh snow had accumulated on the ground. I was a bit buzzed from the drinks, but I figured I was sober enough to drive home. I do not condone drinking and driving at all, but I was tired and simply wanted to get back to my own bed. As I was heading back towards the highway, I realized the local roads were completely dead. Not a single other vehicle was in sight. I made the grave mistake of raising my speed to 40 miles per hour down one particular stretch of road. As I began to approach a sharp bend, I suddenly realized my car had gone into a dangerous skid. I tried not to panic, as this was not the first time I had skidded on ice. I started to steer into the direction of the skid and downshifted the gears to slow down. But as I got even closer to the curve and my car still was not slowing down, absolute panic set in. My car went straight off the side of the road, crashed into a large tree, and the airbag deployed. I was momentarily in total shock from the force of the impact, but thankfully I was relatively unscathed other than a few minor bumps. My car, on the other hand, was completely ruined. The entire front hood was buried deep in a massive bank of snow surrounding the tree I had hit. There was absolutely no chance of me pushing it back onto the road by myself. The very first thing I did was call my roadside assistance company, and they told me they would send a tow truck to my location. But because of the horrible weather conditions, they warned me it could take up to 40 minutes for the truck to reach me. I was stranded on a completely deserted road, surrounded by thick forest with no houses for miles in either direction. I decided to call my parents and ask one of them to drive over and wait with me in the cold. My dad said he would get in his car and drive over right away. I hung up the phone and waited in the quiet car. As I was sitting there, I began to hear something over the sound of the wind howling outside. There were undeniably footsteps crunching in the deep snow. I could not tell exactly from where they were coming, but they sounded somewhat distant. I opened the driver's side door and stepped out. Looking over the roof of my car into the dark, I was not hearing the footsteps anymore. Instead, I was hearing some new strange sounds. It was hard to describe, but it sounded like a wet, heavy slurping. I looked over to where I thought the sound was coming from, and I could see some slight movement by the tree line. It was dark as hell, but I was pretty certain I was looking at the silhouette of a person standing there. I called out a loud hello, but the slurping sound stopped immediately and no one answered. I sat there for a few more seconds awkwardly, but no one ever responded or appeared. I was officially freaked out, so I got back inside my car and locked the doors. Less than a minute later, I heard footsteps in the snow again. Then I suddenly heard a loud thud hit the passenger side window. I could not see out of it because it was covered in snow. Once again, I opened the driver's side door and stepped out. Checking my surroundings, I made a disturbing discovery. There were fresh boot prints circling all around my car, leading into the dark woods. I also noticed there were dark drops of fresh blood in the snow. I grabbed my 9mm handgun from the glove compartment and began to follow the footprints into the woods. A few yards in, my flashlight revealed a dead, decapitated deer, with its stomach ripped completely open. This was getting too weird, so I quickly headed back to my car. I opened the driver's side door, and I had to keep myself from vomiting. Lying directly in my driver's seat was the severed head of the deer, staring right at me. I booked it out of there, running down the dark road until headlights appeared. It was my dad. I got in and explained everything, but he did not believe me. We drove back together to inspect the scene. The footprints were still there, but the deer head was completely gone. All that remained was a large dark pool of blood on my seat and drag marks in the snow. I chose not to call the police. I have no idea who was in the woods that night. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. Imagine being 17 years old, sitting in your air-conditioned bedroom, and playing video games late into the night. It is early June in Chandler, Arizona, and the heat outside is completely unbearable. The desert sun during the day is like a furnace, so when the sun goes down, you finally feel some relief, but you still prefer to stay inside where it is cool. That was exactly how my life looked back when I was a teenager. I was in a heavy gaming phase, and I spent almost all of my free time playing Call of Duty. At this point in my life, I was still living with my parents, but I had the house to myself a lot. My parents traveled frequently for work, and since my older siblings had already moved out, I was the last one left at home. It was a Friday night, and school was out the next day, so I had the perfect excuse to stay up as late as I wanted. But before I could completely lose myself in the game, I had some responsibilities to take care of. I had just submitted a school paper that was due that night, which was a huge relief. With that out of the way, I had to do some grocery shopping on my mother's orders. Since my parents were going to be gone for a while, they left me some cash to buy food. My dad was always very strict about money, so he made me show him the receipts for everything I bought to make sure I was not just pocketing the cash. My mom had texted me a long shopping list, so I hopped into my old Toyota Camry, which was my very first car, and drove over to the local Whole Foods. The shopping trip itself was pretty ordinary and took about an hour, but while I was standing in the checkout line, things started to get a bit weird. There was a guy standing directly behind me in line who just would not stop talking to me. He made a comment about one of the items I was buying, and from there, he just kept going. Even as I was bagging my groceries, he kept trying to spark a conversation. What felt really off was that he was not paying attention to anyone else in the store, just me. I did not want to be rude, so I kept my answers short and polite. When I was finally done, I told him to have a good one, and I walked out to my car. I packed the groceries into the trunk of my Camry and drove back home, glad to be away from that strange encounter. By the time I got back home, it was completely dark outside. I put the groceries away and went straight up to my room to get on my computer. I booted up Call of Duty Black Ops and texted my friend Johnny to tell him to get online. I put on my noise-canceling Logitech headset, which did an amazing job of blocking out any background noise in the house. Johnny joined my lobby, and we started playing Team Deathmatch. We were both determined to play all night and rank up as much as we could. After about 2 hours of intense gaming, my stomach started growling, and I decided to take a break to make some dinner. I told Johnny I would be back on in about an hour, and he said he was going to take a break as well. Our kitchen is downstairs while my bedroom is upstairs. I went down to the kitchen and boiled some water to make a simple plate of pasta. As I was sitting at the kitchen island eating my food, the house was incredibly quiet. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a distinct thump coming from upstairs. It was a heavy, dull sound. I froze for a second, trying to figure out what it was. Did it sound like a footstep? I was not entirely sure. It could have been the house settling, or maybe something falling over, but deep down, a strange feeling started to creep over me. Even though our neighborhood was very safe, and we never worried about crime, I decided to walk over to the front door and lock it. I had a bad habit of leaving the front door unlocked when I was home alone, because I never took the idea of a break-in seriously. It was just something you saw on the local news, not something that happened to you. After locking the door, I walked up the stairs to investigate the sound. I did not really expect to find anyone, but the silence of the house was starting to make me nervous. As I reached the top of the stairs, I called out my brother Tristan's name into the dark hallway. I knew Tristan was not supposed to be home, but I think I just wanted to hear a familiar voice to calm my nerves. No one answered. The hallway was completely empty. I shook my head, thinking I was just being paranoid, and went back into my bedroom. I sat down at my desk, put my headset back on, and texted Johnny that I was back online. A few minutes later, Johnny joined the lobby, and we jumped right back into another game of Team Deathmatch. A couple of games in, I felt a strange sensation. You know that feeling when you feel like you are being watched? I suddenly looked to my left, toward the doorway of my bedroom. I always kept my door open when I was home alone, mostly because my mom told me it kept the air flowing better. The hallway outside my room was completely dark, except for a tiny nightlight plugged into an outlet down the hall. My bedroom, on the other hand, was glowing blue from the LED strip lights I had mounted on my walls. Some of that blue light spilled into the hallway, but the space between the door and the wall was pitch black. I could not see anything through the crack, so I just ignored it and turned back to my monitor. After we finished the next match, Johnny said he had to go run to the bathroom, so he walked away from his headset. While I was waiting in the lobby, I picked up my phone to check my messages. After a moment, I looked back toward the hallway, and my heart stopped. Something was different. The view through the crack of the door was no longer pitch black. I could actually see the faint light of the hallway nightlight through it. And then, the terrifying realization hit me like a physical blow. The only reason the crack had been completely black earlier was because someone had been standing right there, blocking the light. Someone had been standing in the dark, staring through the crack of my door, watching me play video games. Instinct took over. I spun my gaming chair around to face my bed, which was directly behind me. And there, sitting on my bed, was a man. He had a freakishly upright posture, sitting perfectly straight with his hands resting flat on his thighs. He was staring directly at me, and his face was twisted into a bizarre, unnatural smile. I was so terrified that my body went into pure survival mode. I jumped completely out of my chair, landing on top of my desk, and scrambled backward. In my panic, I knocked over my computer monitor, my keyboard, and almost everything else on my desk. I screamed at the top of my lungs, asking him what he wanted. The man did not move. Instead, his smile grew even wider, showing his teeth in a way that looked like he was silently laughing at my terror. Realizing I was trapped in the corner of my room, I scrambled off the desk and bolted out of the door into the hallway. I ran about halfway down the hall, then stopped and looked back to see if he was following me. In the dim blue light spilling from my room, I heard the squeak of my bed springs as the man stood up. Then he slowly and calmly walked out of my bedroom and stopped right in the doorway. He just stood there, looking at me. I screamed at him again, demanding to know what he wanted. The man finally spoke. His voice was stuttered, slow, and completely devoid of any normal emotion. He looked at me and asked if he could play too. The sheer creepiness of his voice sent shivers down my spine. I yelled back, asking him how he had gotten into my house. He slowly raised his hand, took a few steps forward, and pointed down the stairs. He did not say another word, but the gesture made it clear. He had walked right through the front door before I went down to lock it. He had been hiding upstairs the entire time I was eating my dinner. I knew I had to get out of there. My cell phone was still in my bedroom, so I ran down the stairs as fast as I could to reach the landline phone in the kitchen. I grabbed the receiver and then reached into the knife block, pulling out a large kitchen knife. I pointed the knife toward the stairs and screamed that I was calling the police and that he had to leave immediately. I heard slow, heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. A moment later, the man walked past the kitchen. He did not run. He just looked at me with that same blank expression, turned, and walked out the front door. As soon as I heard the front door click, I ran over, slammed it shut, and locked it. I stood there, shaking violently, clutching the kitchen knife in one hand and the phone in the other. I felt a deep sense of shame for being so careless about leaving the door unlocked. After a few minutes of trying to calm my racing heart, I called my parents. My mom was incredibly worried at first, but then she became absolutely furious at how dangerous the situation was. She put my dad on the phone, and he told me to go through every room in the house to make sure nothing had been stolen and that the man was truly gone. I searched the entire house, and to my surprise, everything was exactly where it belonged. The man had not come to steal anything. He had simply come to watch me. To this day, the image of that man sitting on my bed in the dark hallway is something I will never forget. And that brings us to our second story, which is one that I am definitely not proud of. This happened back when I was in middle school, around 2010, when I was 13 years old. Like a lot of 13-year-old boys, I had absolutely no idea how to talk to girls. I was not a shy kid in general. I had plenty of friends, and I did normal 8th grade things. But when it came to girls, I was completely lost. Some of my friends at the time started claiming they had already kissed girls, or gone even further, and I was starting to feel a lot of pressure to keep up. But my voice was still a bit high and prepubescent, and the idea of approaching a girl at school made my stomach turn. Instead of dealing with my anxiety in the real world, I turned to video games. I was a massive gamer back then, and my favorite computer game was a massive multiplayer online role-playing game called GoNu. In GoNu, you would level up by traveling around the fantasy world, killing monsters, and gathering loot. The community was incredibly active, and I spent hours every single day playing it. Eventually, I joined a guild, which was basically an online club for players to team up. It was through this guild that I met a player whose username was Medusa. Medusa was a much higher level than me, and for some reason she took an interest in helping me out. Whenever I logged into the game, she would immediately send me a message, and we would join a party together to share experience points. But as the weeks went on, we stopped focusing so much on the game and started chatting for hours about our personal lives. She told me her real name was Teresa, and she claimed to be 15 years old. I felt an incredibly strong connection with her, which was strange because I had never heard her voice or seen her face. She knew everything about me, including my age, my hometown, and personal details about my family. It felt like having a high-tech pen pal, and the best part was that she lived in New York State, only about an hour away from me. After about a month of talking, we started discussing the idea of meeting up in person. Since I did not have a cell phone at the time, I used an iPod Touch with a free texting application that allowed me to send messages to mobile numbers. Through that app, I decided to send her a picture of myself. It was a classic, cringy 8th grade selfie where I was trying way too hard to look cool. She replied that she thought I was cute, and then she sent a picture back of herself. The girl in the photo was very attractive and looked to be about 15. At this point, our messages became much more flirtatious. But since we were both minors, neither of us could drive an hour to see the other. That was when Teresa told me she had a solution. She claimed her older sister had friends who lived in my town, and that she could easily get a ride to come see me. I was absolutely thrilled. I wanted to make sure we could be alone, so I waited for a weekend when my parents were planning to go to the Hamptons. They were going to be gone for the entire weekend, leaving only me and my 18-year-old brother at home. I practically begged my brother to go hang out with his friends on Saturday night so I could have the house to myself. He agreed, and I gave Teresa my address, telling her to come over whenever she wanted that Saturday. She messaged me saying she would be arriving a bit late, closer to nighttime. I was so incredibly nervous all day that I could not even focus on playing video games. I spent hours cleaning my bedroom, folding my clothes, spraying cologne, and literally rehearsing what I was going to say when she walked through the door. Finally, late that evening, my iPod buzzed. It was a message from Teresa saying she had arrived and was outside. I sprang up from my bed and ran down the stairs to the front door. I looked through the peephole, expecting to see a pretty 15-year-old girl standing on my porch. But there was no one there. I checked my phone and another message popped up. It said that I should come out to the front porch. I unlocked the door, stepped outside, and looked around. The street was completely dark and quiet. There were no cars parked nearby, and no one was in sight. I went back inside, locked the door, and messaged her that I could not see her. She replied, saying she must have the wrong house, and asked for a minute to find the right one. I sat on the living room couch, my heart pounding with nervous energy, staring at my iPod screen. After a few agonizing minutes, she messaged me again. She said she was definitely there and told me to come outside. I was starting to feel a bit uneasy, so I replied and told her to ring the doorbell so I would know she was at the correct house. A second later, the doorbell rang. My stomach did a flip. I walked over to the front door, stood on my tiptoes, and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty. I called out Teresa's name through the solid wooden door. As I kept my eye glued to the peephole, a hand suddenly reached out from the side of the porch and knocked loudly on the door. I called out her name again, my voice shaking, and then a figure stepped directly into the center of the peephole. It was not a 15-year-old girl. It was a short, bald, creepy-looking grown man. He stared directly at the door and spoke. He said, "Hey Joey, it is Medusa from GoNu. I want to talk." A wave of pure horror and disgust washed over me. I stumbled backward. putting my hands over my mouth to keep from screaming. The person I had been sharing my deepest secrets with, the person I had been flirting with for weeks, was a grown man who had lured me into giving him my home address. I ran to my room and tried to call my older brother, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The doorbell downstairs kept ringing over and over, followed by heavy knocking on the door. I locked myself in my bedroom, holding the house phone in my hand, desperately trying to decide if I should call my parents. I was so embarrassed and terrified of what they would say. My bedroom was the only room in the house with the lights turned on, and it had a large window that overlooked the side yard of our corner house. I quickly turned off my desk lamp, walked over to the window, and parted the blinds by just a fraction of an inch. To my horror, the bald man was standing right there in the side yard, trying to peer through the glass. When he saw the blinds move, he began to knock on the window pane. Through the closed glass, I could hear his muffled voice telling me how much of a connection we had, and how we could at least just be friends. I stood frozen in the dark, refusing to answer. I dialed my brother's number again, and this time he finally picked up. I began to cry, telling him to come home immediately, because the girl from the game was actually a grown man, and he was currently outside my window trying to get in. My brother was a big guy, and he immediately realized how dangerous the situation was. He told me he was on his way back with 3 of his friends, and that I needed to stay on the line. I ran up to my parents' bedroom on the 2nd floor and hid in their closet, clutching the phone. Meanwhile, the texting app on my iPod was blowing up with messages from the man, trying to explain why he had to lie about his identity. About 10 minutes later, I heard the sound of car doors slamming outside. My brother and his friends had arrived. I slowly walked downstairs and opened the front door. My brother and his 3 friends had surrounded the short, bald man in the driveway. They were shouting at him, calling him a sick freak, and pushing him backward. The man's defense was absolutely bizarre. He looked at them and claimed that he was only doing this because he was concerned for my well-being. He said he wanted to teach me a lesson about the dangers of inviting strangers from the internet over to my house. I yelled out from the porch, asking him why he had been knocking on my window, telling me we had a connection if this was just a lesson. The man had no answer for that. As my brother and his friends began to get physical, pushing him harder, the man realized he was vastly outnumbered. He turned and quickly walked back to his car. As he backed out of the driveway, my brother kicked his tail light, shattering the plastic, and one of his friends threw a heavy rock directly at his passenger side window. The man sped off into the night, and we never saw him again. It was a deeply humiliating and disturbing experience, but I will always be grateful to my brother and his friends for saving me from what could have been a horrific tragedy. And that brings us to our 3rd and final story, which happened just last year, in May of 2021. To give you some context, I had just officially decided to quit playing Fortnite. The game had gotten a bit stale for me, and my friend Brandon suggested that I download Apex Legends so we could play together instead. I already had the game installed on my console from a long time ago, so I just had to wait for a massive update to finish downloading. Once it was done, I logged on and realized very quickly how bad I was at the game. Since I had not played since the game first launched, my statistics were terrible, and I only had access to the basic starting characters, Pathfinder and Bloodhound. Another important detail to keep in mind is that I owned a pair of extremely high-quality, noise-canceling gaming headphones. When I had them on with the volume turned up, I literally could not hear a single thing happening in the physical world around me. It was a weekend night, and I was home alone, because my parents were out celebrating their wedding anniversary with a late-night dinner, and my brother was staying over at a friend's house. Brandon and I were in the middle of a match when he suddenly gasped. He told me that he had just received a really bizarre text message from a completely random, unknown phone number. I asked him what the text said, and I will never forget the chilling tone in his voice when he read it out loud. The text said, "Look out the window." At first, I laughed it off and told Brandon not to look out his window because it was probably just a prank. But Brandon replied, "No, the text says to tell Luke to look out his window." A cold spike of fear went through me. I turned my head to the left and then to the right. My gaming room was a converted sunroom on the 1st floor of the house, and it had 5 large windows surrounding the space. In a sudden panic, I did not even know which window to look through. I slowly stood up and scanned each pane of glass. And then, in the window furthest from my desk, the one that was mostly hidden by the shadow of the couch, I saw it. There was a man standing directly outside the glass. His back was turned to me, and he was staring out toward the dark yard. I was completely frozen, not knowing what to do. I sat back down and put my headphones back on, trying to convince myself that maybe he was just a neighbor or someone lost. But then Brandon spoke up again, his voice trembling. He said, "Luke, I am not messing with you. The guy just texted me a photo of you looking through the window. He said you look completely clueless." Before I could even process what Brandon was saying, my headphones went completely silent. There was a brief static sound, and then the Xbox notification sound chimed. Brandon had left the party. This was incredibly out of character for him, because he never left a game without saying goodbye or telling me he was going to sleep. I opened the menu and saw that his profile still showed him as active in the match. I was thoroughly confused. A few seconds later, a party invitation popped up on my screen. It was from Brandon's account, so I accepted it immediately, planning to ask him what was going on. But when I joined, the voice that came through my headset was not Brandon's. It was a deep, raspy, unfamiliar voice of a fully grown man. He spoke slowly, and his words made my blood run cold. He said, "Come outside right now, or I am coming in." I ripped the headset off my ears and spun around to look at the window where the man had been standing. He had turned around. He was now facing the glass, and his face was pressed flat against it. He looked completely out of his mind. His face was a dark, angry red, and he was violently slamming his fists against the window pane. What was even more horrifying was that his hands were covered in deep cuts, and blood was gushing down his wrists, smearing all over the glass with every strike. The heavy glass was starting to crack under the force of his blows. I scrambled to find my cell phone on the desk, but when the screen lit up, my heart sank. The battery was at exactly 1%. I knew the phone would die the second I made a call. I held the phone to my mouth, desperate to try and get a message out. I frantically whispered into the receiver, telling the emergency operator that a bleeding, red-faced man was trying to smash his way into my house. Just as I said those words, the man let out a blood-curdling scream and threw his entire body weight against the window. I realized with a shock that our windows had heavy metal screens on the outside. But this man did not care. He had literally torn through the screen with his bare, bloodied hands. With a loud crash, a large shard of glass shattered inward, falling onto the carpet. A hole had opened up, large enough for him to reach his arm through. I screamed at him, telling him to get the hell away from my house, because the police were already on their way. But my words did not stop him. Another massive shard of glass broke away, and the hole was now large enough for a person to crawl through. He began to hoist himself up over the windowsill. Knowing I could not defend myself empty-handed, I bolted out of the room and ran into the kitchen. I grabbed the largest, sharpest knife from the block on the counter. Then, I grabbed the wireless landline phone that was charging on the kitchen wall. I ran up the stairs to the second floor as fast as my legs could carry me. I dialed 911 on the landline and screamed my address to the operator, telling them that an intruder had just shattered my window and was inside my home. The only doors with locks on the second floor of our house were the bathrooms. I had to think fast. I ran into my parents' bedroom, walked into the master bathroom attached to it, and locked the heavy door behind me. But before I locked it, I made a tactical decision. I left the main bedroom door wide open. The bathroom door was tucked away in a corner of the bedroom, making it invisible to anyone standing in the hallway. I hoped that if the man came upstairs, he would see the open bedroom door, assume the room was empty, and keep moving past it. As I stood in the dark bathroom, clutching the kitchen knife, I heard the heavy, wet footsteps of the intruder coming up the wooden stairs. My heart was pounding so hard against my ribs that I was terrified he would hear it. I slowly and quietly opened one of the bathroom drawers, looking for another potential weapon or something to block the door. But the small wooden drawer made a slight creaking sound. The footsteps stopped, and then I heard the heavy stomping run of the man heading directly into my parents' bedroom. He had heard the noise. I braced myself, holding the knife up, prepared to fight for my life. But just as he reached the bedroom, the loud wailing sound of police sirens echoed from the street outside. The police in our town were incredibly fast. and they had arrived in record time. Through the bathroom door, I heard the man freeze. Realizing his time was up, he turned and sprinted back down the stairs, trying to escape through the shattered window. But he was far too late. The front yard was already flooded with red and blue lights. I waited a moment, then unlocked the bathroom door and ran downstairs. I opened the front door and saw several police officers tackling the bleeding man to the ground in our front yard. They slapped handcuffs onto his blood-covered wrists and loaded him into the back of a patrol car. It was only later, during the police investigation, that the full, bizarre truth came to light. It turned out that about 2 hours before this nightmare began, I had been playing Apex Legends and had gotten into a heated match. I had ended up killing this specific player in the game, and afterward, I had sent him some pretty toxic trash talk messages, which is unfortunately common in competitive gaming. Somehow, this man was a highly skilled hacker. He had used my gamer tag to track down my IP address, which led him straight to my home address. He had also managed to find my friend Brandon's phone number through online databases, using it to send those terrifying text messages while he stood outside my house. The realization that someone was willing to commit a violent home invasion and potentially murder me in real life over a video game loss was absolutely terrifying. The man was eventually convicted of aggravated burglary and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The police department actually kept a few patrol cars parked outside my house for the next several nights to make sure I felt safe, but the psychological damage was already done. It took me months to sleep with the lights off, and I have never played competitive online video games the same way since. It is a terrifying reminder of how thin the line really is between our digital lives and the physical dangers that lurk just outside our windows. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. I will never forget when my brother Luke and I snuck out past our bedtime to explore an allegedly haunted house down our block. I was only 10 years old, and my older brother Luke was 12. After our parents said goodnight to us, I quietly crept into Luke's room. We took a couple of hand-powered flashlights with us and slid outside through his first-floor window. Those flashlights worked by constantly squeezing a noisy mechanical trigger to spin a little generator. They were incredibly loud, but they were the only lights we had. We walked down the block, and within 2 minutes, we were standing in front of the property. Every single kid in our neighborhood said the place was haunted. The antique design of the building, its complete isolation from the rest of the houses, the broken windows, and the rotting wood made it look like a set from a horror movie. We went around to the backyard. This was all my confident brother's idea, and I was absolutely terrified. The back door was locked, which made me feel a bit of relief because I thought we might finally go home. But Luke grabbed a heavy plank of wood laying in the grass and began smashing the already chipped window. He reached in, unlocked it, and slid it up. We hopped inside and began cranking those noisy flashlights. Immediately after entering, we noticed it was like 90 degrees inside, which was very strange for a cool September night in the mid-70s. There was no graffiti, and the house was relatively empty except for a few broken pieces of furniture that were not worth taking. It seemed we were the first ones to enter the house in years. We walked up from the little den to the main floor, constantly cranking our loud flashlights. That is when we heard a slight creak in the floorboards from the room directly above us. We both froze in our tracks. I tugged on Luke's arm to leave, but he told me the house was old and it was just normal settling noises. I stopped cranking my flashlight and urged Luke to do the same, but he called me stupid. Then, another loud creak came from above us. Luke started walking upstairs toward the noise. I did not want to go, but I was not about to stay downstairs alone in the dark, so I followed close behind him. There was a door leading to the room right above where we had been standing. I begged him not to open it, but he wanted to play the tough older brother. He reached for the doorknob while cranking his noisy flashlight, but then he suddenly stopped. He pressed his ear against the door, listening for something. There was a long, heavy silence. Then, a single, deafening bang slammed on the door from the other side, sending my brother staggering into the wall in pain, covering his ear. We dropped the flashlights and sprinted straight out the back window and back home. We were so loud that our parents caught us and grounded us both for a week. 2 nights later, I woke to a mechanical whirring outside my window and a bright glare sneaking through my blinds. It was the exact sound of my hand crank flashlight. I stood up and looked out, but the sound stopped, leaving nothing but complete terrifying blackness. Now, some terrors do not happen in abandoned buildings. Sometimes they happen in public places where you should feel safe. During my first year of university, I made friends with a few other students. Our university was quite old and very notorious for ghostly figures and paranormal reports. The campus janitors and security guards were all too familiar with these unusual occurrences. The art and design class I took met in the oldest building on campus, which was widely believed to be the most haunted section. Late one afternoon, just before 5 o'clock, my friend needed to use the restroom and asked me to walk with her. I agreed, wanting to rest my eyes from the bright projector screen. She rushed into a stall, and I waited outside in the hallway. Realizing she was going to take longer than I expected, I decided to walk back to the classroom without telling her. But as soon as I sat down, she barged into the room, pale and shouting my name. She said that while she was in the stall, she heard the sink faucet turn on. She thought it was me playing a prank, but when she opened her stall, no one was at the sinks. Yet the stall next to her was locked from the inside. Thinking I was hiding inside, she asked if it was me. There was no answer. She looked down through the gap under the door but saw no shoes or legs. At that moment, she heard clear feminine whispers and humming coming from inside that locked, empty stall. Terrified, she ran back to class. Later, a janitor told us that no one should ever be in that restroom after 5 in the evening, as there is a known ghost of a woman who resides in those stalls. My friends and I never went near that bathroom late in the day ever again. It is easy to think that ghosts are the only things we should fear. We watch horror movies and tell scary stories around the campfire, imagining spirits and phantom whispers in the dark. But in reality, the physical world holds dangers that are far more immediate and far more lethal. The living can inflict a terror that no ghost ever could, and you do not just find these threats in abandoned buildings. Sometimes they are waiting for you behind a closed apartment door in a foreign country where help is far away. A few months ago, I was serving in Japan as a missionary for my church. My 2-year service was almost over, and I was assigned to my last area, Kyoto, which is a bustling tourist destination filled with incredible historical temples and busy, narrow streets. Late one night, my companion and I were knocking on doors to see if anyone wanted to learn about our faith. We came across a very cheap, run-down apartment building and decided to give it a shot. We went to the second floor of this building and knocked on a door. A middle-aged man in worn-out, dirty clothes answered with an awkward smile on his face. We introduced ourselves and asked if he would like to talk. Instead of answering directly, he invited us inside. Usually, this is a positive sign for missionaries, but the moment we stepped inside, I knew we were in trouble. The tiny apartment reeked of marijuana and urine. The layout was extremely small, consisting of a tiny entryway, a bathroom on the left, a small kitchen counter on the right, and one single multi-purpose room with a low table, a TV, and a mattress on the floor. The man sat us down on either side of the table and began to drink a massive amount of alcohol. As he drank, his friendly behavior disappeared, and he started to go on an aggressive rant about how much he hated Christians and wanted to kill them. My companion and I sat there completely tense, praying silently that he would not turn violent. Then the man leaned forward and whispered that he was going to tell us a dangerous secret. He reached under his bed and pulled out a large box. When he opened it, we saw thousands and thousands of dollars worth of genuine Japanese yen. He smiled and boasted that he was an illegal drug lord, working directly with the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia. We immediately realized the mortal danger we were in. We were trapped in a tiny room with a heavily intoxicated, armed criminal who had just revealed his deepest secrets to 2 American teenagers. If he sobered up and realized his mistake, we would be killed. We tried to make a polite excuse to leave, but he refused to let us go, continuing to shout and rant about religion. Finally, we decided we had to run. We stood up, told him we were leaving, and walked quickly to the door. The man stood up behind us and began to reach into a box for something, but we did not wait to see what it was. We opened the door, ran outside, and sprinted all the way back to our apartment as fast as we could. We always wondered if he was reaching for a gun to shoot us before we could escape. Our final story shows how terror can find you in your own home. When I was 15 years old, I was home alone one night. My bedroom was on the first floor, located right next to the living room. It was a very strange setup. I had my bedroom door shut and was playing video games with my headphones on when I heard a strange sound coming from the living room. I took my headphones off and realized it was a light tap on the window. I walked through the dark living room, went out the front door and checked the bushes by the window. There was nobody there. I went back to my room, left the door open, and resumed playing my game. Barely 5 seconds later, another loud knock rattled the glass. This time, I ran to the front door barefoot, ready to catch whoever was messing with me. But when I ran outside, the yard was completely empty. No one was in the bushes, and no one was in sight. I assumed it was just local kids playing a prank and decided to ignore it. On my way back to my bedroom, a third knock sounded. I ran straight to the window to catch them, but the yard was empty. However, I felt a strange sensation right above my toes. I looked down, and through the glass I saw the dark shadow of a figure sitting on the ground, leaning right against the window. I stood there in the quiet house, staring down at that dark shape, unable to move my legs as my mind raced with terrifying possibilities. The shock sent me running back to my room in a matter of seconds. I locked the door, slid under my bed, and tried to call my dad. As I was dialing, the knocking on the glass continued, louder and more frantic. When I finally reached my dad, he told me I was crazy for not calling the police, and he dialed them for me. 10 minutes later, the local police arrived at our house. The figure was gone and there were no signs of forced entry. But the memory of that silent shadow sitting right outside my glass window is something that still terrifies me today. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. When a young woman named Sarah was 22 years old, she decided to try her luck on a popular dating app. At that point in her life, she was just trying to navigate the early stages of adulthood, working hard and hoping to find someone normal to spend her free time with. That was when she swiped right and matched with a guy named Hunter. At first glance, Hunter seemed perfectly fine. He was polite, good-looking, and seemed to have his life together. Their very first date was just a quick coffee meeting at a local cafe. It lasted less than an hour, which Sarah felt was a perfect screening process to make sure he was actually a normal person. He passed the test easily, and so, they decided to go on a second date. This time, they met up at a nearby bar for some drinks on a Friday night. They both got a nice buzz, the conversation flowed easily, and Sarah left feeling pretty good about the whole thing. It was a nice, normal time, but then came the third date. They went out for dinner at a sit-down restaurant. During the meal, Sarah started to question things. She began to wonder if she really clicked with his personality, or if there was something slightly off about him. He would make strange, aggressive comments, and his energy felt a bit too intense. Still, at the end of the night, Hunter leaned in and kissed her. It was the first and only time they ever kissed. Sarah convinced herself that because she had allowed him to kiss her, things must have gone all right. She decided to ignore her gut feeling and give him another chance. It was not until a couple of weeks later that they went on their fourth and final date. They decided to go out for drinks once again. However, this time Sarah went into the date with a much less excited mindset. She was paying very close attention to the little quirks in his behavior, and she started to realize that some of his mannerisms were kind of unusual. It was hard for her to explain exactly what she meant, but some of his gestures and the way he looked at her gave off highly antisocial and borderline creepy vibes. As the night went on, Hunter started to drink way too much alcohol. He became increasingly intoxicated, and his behavior changed. He started getting really touchy-feely with her at the bar, trying to kiss her multiple times. Sarah was not a fan of public displays of affection at all, especially not when she was sitting at a crowded bar with other customers right next to her. She politely turned down his advances and tried to create some physical space between them. Within a few minutes, she mentioned that she was feeling really tired, heavily implying that they should pack up and leave. Hunter seemed annoyed, but he asked for the check, paid it, and then they grabbed their coats and walked outside. As they were walking to their cars in the chilly night air, Hunter suddenly stopped her. He turned to her and very bluntly asked if they could go home together. Sarah shook her head and said, "Not tonight. I am really tired and I have to work tomorrow morning." In reality, she was lying about having to work, but she just wanted an easy excuse to get away from him. Shockingly, Hunter did not take no for an answer. He kept trying to persuade her, saying things like he would just drag her to work the next day himself. Sarah found this to be completely absurd, whether he was drunk or not. On top of that, she was really unhappy about the fact that he was planning to drive home while clearly heavily intoxicated. She made the firm decision, right then and there, that she would never see this man again. She walked to her car, which was parked in a lot across the street, got in, and started driving home. Because she had consumed a couple of drinks herself earlier in the night, she was driving very slowly and with extreme caution. She was not drunk, but she wanted to be absolutely safe. She was also overly alert of her surroundings, constantly looking around for police cars. Perhaps this heightened state of awareness was the reason she picked up on a very disturbing detail. She noticed that the exact same car had been driving behind her for quite some time. Even after she made at least 3 random turns through different neighborhoods, the headlights remained right behind her. When she reached a certain stoplight, the car pulled up closer and she realized in horror that it looked exactly like Hunter's car. Her heart began to race. She grabbed her phone and texted him, asking if he was following her. Almost instantly, Hunter texted back. He said, "Yes. I just want to make sure you get home okay." Sarah was stunned. She immediately dialed his number to confront him, but he would not pick up. The situation was incredibly weird and, quite frankly, deeply creepy. She pulled her car over to the side of the road and texted him to stop following her, telling him that she was completely fine on her own. She watched her rearview mirror. Hunter's car stopped dead in the middle of the street for a second, presumably so he could read her text message. Then, he accelerated and drove right past her, disappearing into the night. He did not text her back. Sarah drove the rest of the way home in a state of high anxiety, locking all the doors behind her. She did not receive any messages from him until she was safe in her bed. He finally texted, saying, "I hope I did not weird you out tonight. Sorry I got so drunk. Next time we should do something a little more low-key like dinner at my place or something." Sarah was so disgusted by his behavior that she decided not to answer. The next morning, she woke up to a follow-up text from him that read, "Oh no, is the vibe dead?" She still decided to wait a bit before responding, wanting to gather her thoughts. But not even 2 hours later, Hunter sent her another message. This time, just a single question mark. Realizing that he was not going to stop, she decided she had to reply now before things got any worse. She typed out a message saying, "Hey, I had a great time getting to know you, but I just think our personalities do not click that much. And I also really just want to focus on myself right now. I hope you understand." As soon as she sent that text, the floodgates opened. The angry texts started rolling in, one after another. The worst of these messages said, "No, I do not understand. You strung me along for 4 dates just to tell me that. How about you pay me back half of everything I bought for you?" After that, he sent several more angry, threatening messages that actually contained her personal information. This crossed a major line for Sarah, and it was enough to prompt her to block his number entirely. She genuinely thought that blocking him would be the end of the ordeal. But then, her phone started ringing. She began receiving non-stop phone calls from a blocked number with no caller ID. She chose to ignore every single one of them. Eventually, after hours of trying, the calls finally stopped, and she thought he had gotten the message. The very next day, Sarah got home from work. Her parents, whom she lived with, were not home at the time. As she walked up to the front entrance, her heart sank. There, sitting on the stoop, was a fresh bouquet of flowers. Next to the flowers was a handwritten card. She opened the card and read it. It was an apology from Hunter, begging her for a second chance. But the flowers were not a comfort. They were a terrifying revelation. Hunter somehow knew exactly where she lived, even though she had never given him her address or invited him over. In his twisted mind, he must have thought this gesture would come off as charming and romantic. In reality, it was extremely alarming. Furious and terrified, Sarah unblocked his number just to send one final stern message. She wrote, "Please do not contact me anymore, and never come to my house again, or I will file for a restraining order." She immediately blocked him again, so she would not have to see whatever angry response he would send. For a short while, things went quiet. Sarah began to let her guard down, thinking the threat of legal action had worked, but she could not have been more wrong. Not long after the flower incident, Sarah found herself home alone for the night. Her parents were away, leaving her by herself in their large house. Sarah's bedroom was a loft-style room located at the very highest point of the house. In the middle of the night, she was abruptly awoken by a sound. At first, in her half-asleep state, she was not entirely sure what she had heard, but a deep instinct told her that something was wrong. She sat up in bed, trying her best to listen closely to the dark, silent house. That was when she heard a distinct noise coming from downstairs. It was the very obvious sound of a door opening from outside her bedroom, one of the doors on the upper level of the house. She knew for an absolute fact that nobody was supposed to be home that night. Even through the heavy haze of being freshly awoken, the terrifying realization hit her instantly. There was an intruder in her home. Panicking, Sarah quietly crawled out of her bed and dropped onto the floor. She shimmed her body underneath the bed, pulling herself as far back as she could. She grabbed her phone and quickly dialed 911, while also frantically texting her family members to double-check if anyone had come home unexpected. Nobody replied. As she lay flat on the carpet under her bed, she heard distant rummaging noises coming from another area of the house. It sounded like someone was searching through the other bedrooms. Then she heard the heavy sound of footsteps approaching. Her bedroom door pushed open. The footsteps began to walk up the carpeted stairs that led directly into her loft bedroom. When the intruder reached the top step, there was a sudden, agonizing silence. Because the entire loft room was thickly carpeted, Sarah could no longer hear any potential footsteps. She lay frozen, staring out from under the bed. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of drawers being pulled open. It was the dresser right next to her bed. The intruder was going through her personal belongings. Sarah held her hands tightly over her mouth and nose, trying to mask her heavy, panicked breathing. Her heart was beating so incredibly fast and loud that she was convinced the intruder would hear it. In the darkness, she heard the man whisper under his breath, "God damn it." The moment she heard those words, a chill ran down her spine. The voice sounded incredibly familiar. It sounded exactly like Hunter. Sarah remained absolutely still under the bed, praying with every fiber of her being that her phone would not receive any notifications or make any sounds. She heard more loud rummaging sounds as the intruder went through her entire dresser, throwing things around. Then the mattress above her shifted. She felt the heavy weight of the man sitting down directly on her bed. She opened her eyes and looked through the gap in the bed skirt. There, in the dim light of the bedroom, she could clearly see the outline of two shoes resting on the carpet. The intruder was sitting right above her. She had no idea what he was doing, but he sat there in complete silence for over 2 or 3 minutes. Those minutes felt like an eternity to Sarah, who was trapped inches below him. Finally, the man stood up. She heard him whisper, "Fucking bitch," under his breath. He hastily shoved the dresser drawers shut, walked back down the loft stairs, and closed the door behind him. Sarah listened closely as the footsteps faded down the main stairs toward the living room. Still hiding under the bed, Sarah whispered into her phone to the 911 dispatcher, giving them her location and explaining that the intruder was still inside. She stayed huddled in the dark for another 10 to 15 minutes, terrified that he would return. Finally, she heard the faint sound of police sirens approaching, followed by a knock at the front door. She carefully crawled out from her bed and ran downstairs to let the officers in. The tension in the air was thick. After she let the first officer inside, she explained everything that had happened. The officer immediately began a sweep of the house, and soon after, a female officer arrived to assist in the search. They did not find anyone inside, but during their search they discovered a disturbing detail. Every single window on the ground floor of the house was unlocked. In particular, the dining room window was wide open. It was a large window, easily big enough for a grown man to crawl through. Outside that window was a thick bush, and it became clear that the intruder had squeezed through the bushes, forced the window open, and climbed inside. Sarah gave a detailed verbal statement to the officers, received a police report number, and they eventually left. When her parents returned home the next day, They were devastated. They went straight to the police station with Sarah to provide all the evidence they had. When Sarah and her parents walked into the police station the following morning, they were hoping for immediate action. They brought printouts of every single text message, detailed timelines of when the calls occurred, and the exact coordinates of where Hunter had followed her on the night of their last date. But the detectives explained that the legal system has very strict boundaries. Without a fingerprint, a hair sample, or a clear video recording of Hunter's face inside the house, they simply could not file criminal burglary charges against him. It was a frustrating and disheartening realization for Sarah, who knew in her heart exactly who had been standing in her bedroom. She felt let down by the system that was supposed to protect her. The police promised to investigate, but they explained that without solid physical proof or camera footage showing Hunter inside the house, it would be extremely difficult to charge him with the break-in. Sadly, the investigation eventually lost steam due to the lack of evidence. However, Sarah was able to successfully obtain a restraining order against Hunter. She was strongly advised by her lawyers to never contact him again, and to never directly accuse him of the break-in to avoid legal retaliation. Hunter thankfully never contacted her again, but the damage was done. From that terrifying night until the day she finally moved out of her parents' house, Sarah lived in constant fear. She was always uncomfortable, always looking out the windows, terrified that he was lurking in the shadows outside. Even to this day, years later, she still occasionally worries that he might somehow find out where she currently lives. Just as Sarah had to deal with the terrifying reality of an obsessed adult who could not handle rejection, a young girl named Maya found herself dealing with a very similar yet uniquely disturbing situation when she was only in the 6th grade. This entire ordeal began during the week of Halloween. Maya was a happy, ordinary young girl who loved hanging out with her friends. That week, she decided to stay after school to help decorate a haunted house for the upcoming school Halloween carnival. It was a fun activity, and she got to hang out and fool around with her classmates. As a reward for their hard work, the school would provide them with free pizza, which made the whole experience even better. Along with Maya and her close group of friends, there was another boy in her grade who also stayed late to help with the decorations. Maya would refer to him as Chris. Throughout the entire week of working on the haunted house, Maya and Chris got along perfectly fine. He was genuinely a funny, cool kid, and he never once gave her any reason to feel uneasy or uncomfortable around him. They laughed, joked, and worked together without any issues. Fast forward 2 weeks later. Halloween had passed and school life had returned to its normal routine. One afternoon during recess, Maya was suddenly approached by a group of girls in her grade. All of them had wide grins on their faces, giggling and looking incredibly excited. Maya was confused and asked them what was going on. The girls leaned in and told her that she had a secret admirer, and that this boy would be texting her later that night. Maya would be lying if she said she was not excited, or, at the very least, highly curious about this. Like any young girl in the 6th grade, she wanted to know who this mystery boy was. Later that evening, when she was in her room getting ready to go to sleep, her iPad lit up with a notification. At the time, the only communication app she was allowed to use was Facebook Messenger. She mostly used it to stay in touch with her parents whenever she was home alone. She opened the app and saw that she had a new message from Chris. She had completely forgotten that she had added him as a friend on Facebook back around Halloween. The message from Chris was short and direct. It simply read, "Maya, I need to talk to you." Maya felt a sudden wave of concern. She quickly typed back, asking him what was going on and if everything was okay. To this day, she deeply wishes she had never replied to that message. As soon as her text sent, the typing bubbles appeared on her screen. They stayed there, dancing up and down, for a good 2 minutes. This meant that Chris was typing an incredibly long message. To Maya, sitting in her quiet bedroom, those 2 minutes felt like an absolute eternity. Finally, the message came through. What she read was completely unexpected and deeply overwhelming. In a massive, dense paragraph, Chris confessed his deep love for her. He explained that she had been driving him absolutely crazy ever since they worked on the haunted house together on Halloween. He then went on to explain how he had been trying to impress her during recess, trying to show off his soccer skills and flirt with her. but she had never seemed to notice his efforts. Chris wrote that he was growing extremely tired of being ignored by her. The long message ended with the words, "I want you to notice me, so I guess what I am trying to say is, will you be my girlfriend?" Maya cringed at every single word on the screen. She stared at the message for a long time, her mind racing. She felt incredibly uncomfortable. She barely even knew this kid, and they had completely drifted apart after the Halloween decorations were finished. She wanted to let him down as easily as possible, because she did not want to hurt his feelings or cause any unnecessary drama at school. She finally typed out a polite response, telling him that she just did not like him in that way, and that she wanted to just remain friends. She could tell right away that Chris did not take this rejection well. He immediately started typing back, asking her why over and over again. Maya felt trapped, forced to come up with a different excuse each time he questioned her, until he finally stopped responding altogether. The next morning at school turned out to be an absolute nightmare. As soon as Maya walked onto the school grounds, several of Chris' friends started approaching her. They began telling her that Chris wanted to kiss her. They said that Chris had told the entire 6th grade about his plan, and that he had openly bragged that he would do it, even if it meant cornering her somewhere on the school property. Maya took this as a direct, physical threat. Feeling scared and helpless, she decided to immediately tell her classroom teacher about what was happening. The teacher took the situation seriously, but did not seem to know how to handle it fully. She told Maya that she should stay inside the classroom during recess and lunch, and that if Chris ever got anywhere near her, she should run straight back to the safety of the room. This solution did not feel like enough for Maya. She was terrified of being cornered. So, she went to the principal's office and reported Chris directly. The principal listened to her story and assured her that he would take action and handle the situation right away. This gave Maya a temporary sense of relief, hoping the nightmare would finally end. It is important to note that Maya lived right across the street from the school. It was a very short walk, and everyone at the school knew exactly where she lived, including Chris. This detail would soon make her situation much worse. Later that week, school let out, and Maya began her usual walk home. She crossed the street, unlocked her front door, and stepped inside. She had not even been inside her house for more than 2 minutes, when she heard a sudden, loud knocking on her front door. Startled, she walked over to the window and peeked outside. She was just in time to see the figure of a young boy ducking down and hiding behind a parked car across the street. It was clearly Chris. He had followed her home from school. Moments later, Maya's mother opened the front door. There was no one on the porch, but lying on the floor was a piece of folded paper. Not surprisingly, it was addressed directly to Maya. Her mother handed it to her, and Maya read the note out loud. The note said that there was a special surprise waiting for her underneath the Cadillac parked in their driveway. At the time, that Cadillac belonged to Maya's older brother. Maya's mother immediately went outside to investigate. She looked under the car, but there was nothing there. However, starting from that exact afternoon, her brother's Cadillac mysteriously stopped working altogether. To this day, Maya has no idea what Chris did to the vehicle, but the damage was so severe and costly that her brother was ultimately forced to sell the car for parts. Unfortunately, the harassment did not stop there. Over the next several days, Maya was constantly badgered by Chris' friends at school. They would surround her, telling her that she needed to give Chris a chance, and that he would treat her right if she just agreed to be his girlfriend. Then, things escalated. One afternoon, as Maya was walking home, she heard a very faint, distinct sound behind her. It was the click of an iPhone camera. She quickly spun around and caught Chris holding his phone up, capturing a photo of her walking away. She was stunned. Who knew how many photos of her he already had saved on his phone? Every single morning, Maya would wake up to a new message from Chris. He would send texts saying things like, "I can't wait to see you at school today," or "I bet you will look beautiful today." The constant stalking and harassment were getting worse by the day, and Maya was beginning to fear for her physical safety, especially now that he knew exactly where she lived and was actively watching her house. Finally, Maya was called down to the school counselor's office. She felt a huge wave of relief, expecting the counselor to tell her that Chris was finally going to face serious consequences, or that the police were being called. Instead, what she heard was deeply disturbing. The female counselor sat her down and began telling her that boys will be boys. She said that young boys do crazy things when they are in love, and that Maya should not be angry or upset about Chris' actions. In fact, the counselor told her that she should feel flattered by his attention, claiming that this kind of situation was bound to happen eventually, and that the only thing Maya could do was accept it and learn from the experience. At the time, being only a young sixth grader, Maya did not fully comprehend how wrong and damaging those words were. She genuinely trusted the adult authority figure and believed her. But looking back on it as an adult, she realizes how insane and dangerous it was for a professional counselor to say that to a young girl who was being actively stalked. I am sure by now almost everyone knows what Fortnite is. It is one of the most popular video games in the world, and for the longest time, I had known about it but never actually played it. That was until my friends basically forced me to download it so I could play with them. They wanted to play in squads, which is what it is called when you play in groups of 4. My 3 friends were Evan, Xavier, and Braxton. Evan was hands down the best player in our group, and basically the initiator of these matches. Xavier was the second best, and then there was Braxton. Braxton was a pretty quiet guy who only spoke on his headset when he was in trouble or needed immediate help in the game. Evan, Xavier, and I, on the other hand, just goofed around and talked the entire time. The 2 of them did their best to explain how to play to me over the headset, telling me where to go, how to build, and how to stay alive, but none of that really matters. I will skip ahead to the important part of that evening. We were in the middle of a pretty intense match when suddenly Evan stopped talking. There was a good 10 seconds of complete silence from his end. Then, Evan, who was leading us from one point on the virtual map to another, stopped dead in his tracks. His character just stood completely still in the middle of the screen. Xavier turned on his headset, sounding pretty annoyed, and told Evan to move his character before he got us all eliminated. But the character still just stood there in place, and Evan said absolutely nothing. According to the screen, though, Evan's microphone was still active and making noise. I could hear a strange muffled background noise that seemed to be coming from Evan's room. Xavier, Braxton, and I were all taking turns telling Evan to hurry up and move, or we were going to ditch him and keep playing without him. But then, we all dropped completely silent. A horrific, almost painfully loud screaming came through Evan's microphone. It did not sound like he was screaming directly into his headset. Instead, it sounded like Evan was somewhere in the far background of the room, yelling in absolute terror. Then, a heavy door slammed shut in the background, and the 3 of us were left sitting in our own rooms, completely stunned and not knowing what to say or do. I told Xavier and Braxton that I would call Evan immediately on his cell phone, and I turned off my console. I tried calling his phone 5 times in a row, but he never picked up. Since his house was only a 2-minute drive away from mine, I decided to just get in my car and drive over there to check on him. When I got to his house, I saw that there were no cars parked in the driveway. However, the front door was wide open, and the lights were turned on throughout the entire house. I let myself in, screaming Evan's name as loud as I could. A moment later, a shaky voice screamed back from somewhere upstairs. I followed the sound of his voice right up to his loft bedroom. When I walked into the room, I found him hiding completely flat under his bed. He looked out at me and desperately told me to hide. I told him to get out from under the bed right now and tell me what on earth was going on. He said there was someone else in his bedroom. For the longest time, Evan would only speak in very short, limited sentences. He was trembling. But once he finally calmed down, he explained the whole thing in terrifying detail. As Evan was playing Fortnite with us, he felt a sudden, distinct tap on the underside of his mattress. He pulled the heavy cloth material that covered the sides of his bed up, peeked underneath, and saw a grown man hiding directly under his bed. That was the exact moment he threw his headset onto the bed and screamed as he backed into the far corner of his room. He said the man slowly emerged from under the bed, while Evan was still paralyzed in fear in the corner, unable to do anything but scream. The man did not say a word. He simply walked straight out of the bedroom door, down the stairs, and out of the house. At that moment, we did not know if the man was still lurking around the property, so we called the police. 2 officers showed up. A male officer went inside the house to look around. while a female officer stayed outside with us, writing down everything Evan described in a small pocket notebook. Eventually, the search turned up nothing, and the officers left. I stayed over at Evan's house that night just to make him feel better. To this day, we still play the game together, but we never look at his bedroom the same way again. I have never been a huge video game person, but all my friends have been into them for a while. I always felt a bit left out when they would text the group chat telling everyone to jump on the game. I had played a few times and understood the basics, but I just was not very good at it. So, on a quiet Monday night, I decided to hop on the game by myself just to practice and get better. I did this over and over, playing match after match, and I actually started getting pretty decent. Eventually, I decided to play with other real players online. I was not playing with my actual friends, just random people matchmaking from all over. I got put into a game of duos, which means you play with one other person on your team. His gamertag was BobRockets16, or something very similar to that with a few extra letters. We lost the game pretty quickly and ranked somewhere around number 20. After the game ended, I received a personal message on the console from the guy. He said he thought I was really good, and that we should play another match together. It was a bit strange because I had actually played quite poorly that game, but I figured it was harmless, so we started another match. This time, the guy turned on his microphone and began trying to talk to me. Since I did not have a gaming microphone of my own, I could not talk back to him. I could only hear his voice playing out loud through my television speakers. Based on his tone and the things he was saying, he seemed to be getting highly annoyed that I was not replying. I heard him tell me to put my microphone on and stop being a coward, using some pretty harsh language. Any thought of this guy being friendly was completely gone, and I realized he was just an aggressive online troll. I decided I would just finish the match and then block him. He kept mumbling things into his microphone, most of it incoherent, because I was sitting far away from the television, and the in-game sounds were very loud. But then the room went cold. I distinctly heard him say my name through the speakers, and it was not just my first name, he said my full legal name. When I heard this, absolute panic washed over me. I frantically wondered if my real name was somehow displayed on my gaming profile, but I knew for a fact that it was not. The guy kept talking over the microphone, but I was not listening anymore. I ran over to the console and pulled the plug, turning it off in a complete panic. Just knowing that the sound of his voice was gone made me let out a massive sigh of relief. I immediately texted my friends and told them what had just happened. They all seemed to think it was a big joke, typing back lol and laughing at my reaction. I put my phone down on my desk and went over to my laptop to distract myself. Suddenly, my phone vibrated again. I expected it to be another joke from one of my friends, but it was in text from an unknown number. The message simply said, "Hi," followed by my full name. I typed back, asking who this was. I watched the screen as the typing bubbles with the 3 dots appeared for a very long time. I waited anxiously to see what this person was going to say next. The next message read, "Is this your address?" followed by my actual home address. Once again I typed, "Who is this?" and then I lied, sending a text that said, "No, that is not my address." The person never responded after that. At this point, I started accusing my friends of playing a massive prank on me. They all swore up and down that they had nothing to do with it, but I did not believe them. I figured if it really was them, the more I reacted, the more amusement they would get out of it. I decided to just go to bed and ignore my friends. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. I was almost positive I had heard a strange noise, but because I had been asleep, I could not identify what it was. I sat up in bed, looking around my dark room. Then, a sharp, loud set of knocks sounded directly on my bedroom window. Instead of looking out to see who was there, I panicked. I ran straight out of my room and into the nearest bathroom, locking the door behind me. There were no windows in that bathroom, so I felt safe. I actually ended up falling asleep on the bathroom floor. When I woke up the next morning, I texted my friends again, telling them off. They laughed, but when I saw them in person later that day, they seemed genuinely confused and insisted they had nothing to do with it. To this day, I really do not know if my friends pulled the ultimate prank, or if that random player actually tracked down my personal information and came to my house. My 10-year-old son, Chris, had been playing Fortnite all day, every day for the past few months, and it was honestly driving me completely insane. Every single day, all I heard from his bedroom was the constant sound of the digital bus honking its horn every 10 minutes, followed by endless rapid gunshots coming through his speakers. Eventually, one night at around 9 p.m., Chris walked out of his room and shouted into the kitchen that he was having a friend over. I asked him who on earth was coming over at this hour. He casually replied that it was some guy from Fortnite who lived around here. A wave of pure panic went off in my head. Apparently, my young son had invited over a random stranger he had met online. When I asked him how old this person was, Chris just shrugged his shoulders and said he did not know, but that the guy sounded kind of old on the microphone. I started to freak out, knowing that some random stranger, who was likely an adult, was on his way to my house to see my 10-year-old son. I immediately locked all the doors in the house and turned on every single porch light. I told Chris to go back to his room, keep playing his game, and absolutely do not talk to anyone. I stood by the front windows, waiting and watching the dark street. Finally, a car pulled up directly in front of the house. It stopped, and the driver turned off the headlights. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He began walking up the pathway to my front door. My heart dropped into my stomach. In the bright light of the porch, I could see a middle-aged man, probably in his late 40s, who was mildly overweight. He walked up the front steps and rang the doorbell 3 times. I stood perfectly still and ignored it. Then he started pounding heavily on the door. I ignored that as well, praying he would just go away. He eventually walked down the steps and looked up at the windows as he walked along the path. I made sure to stay hidden in the shadows so he couldn't see me. I thought for sure he would get back into his car and leave, but instead, he walked around to the side of the house, out of sight. He was heading straight for my back door. A moment later, I heard the back door being nudged and rattled. He was clearly trying to turn the handle and open it. I stayed exactly where I was, knowing the door was locked securely. After a few minutes, the noises at the back door stopped. I waited in the kitchen for 5 minutes in total silence. I wanted to see if he was gone, so I shut off the kitchen lights and gently lifted the blinds to peer outside. Right there, pressed against the glass, just 2 inches away from my face, was the man's face looking into the kitchen. He was staring directly at me. I screamed at the top of my lungs, yelling that I was calling the police. That finally scared him. He turned around, ran back to his car, and sped away into the night. I did not actually call the police, but I marched straight into Chris' room and scolded him severely. I grounded him for 2 weeks, taking away all video games for endangering himself and our home. I still get sick to my stomach thinking about what might have happened if I had not been home that night. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. Imagine living near a quiet, secluded body of water that almost nobody else seems to care about. For a long time, there was a pond located just about half a mile away from my old house. Everyone in the area called it Daryl's Pond. To this day, I have absolutely no idea who Daryl actually was, but since nobody owned it, people would once in a blue moon go fishing there. For the most part, it was just me. I had even dug a wooden pole deep into the muddy ground near the shore so I could tie a rope to it and keep my small kayak secure. It was my little sanctuary. One afternoon, right around 3 o'clock, I paddled out to the absolute middle of the pond. It was the deepest part of the water and always yielded the best catches of the day. As I sat there, I noticed movement near the tree line. Another person was walking out from the thick woods. I wanted to be neighborly, so I gave him a warm wave and smiled. The man did not wave back. Instead, he hopped right into a small boat floating by the edge and immediately started rowing directly toward me. As his boat got closer, I decided to break the ice and told him it was a perfect day to be on the water. The man stopped rowing, looked at me, and said yes, absolutely, but then he just stopped talking. The silence started to feel incredibly heavy and awkward. I felt this strange pressure to keep the conversation going, so I asked him if he had come out there to throw some lines today. He looked at me blankly and replied that he did not actually fish. I tried to chuckle and told him that it is never a bad day to just relax on the pond. Instead of backing off, the man kept rowing closer. He did not stop until the front of his boat collided directly with mine. There was a loud thud that echoed across the quiet water. I was 24, and this man looked like he was in his late 50s. We sat in an agonizing silence. I tried to act completely normal and focus on my fishing line, but I could physically feel his eyes locked onto me. I took a quick glance to my right. Sure enough, he was just staring directly at my face, not blinking. I decided to be bold. I turned my head and locked eye contact with him. We stared at each other for about 4 seconds before he finally looked away. I asked him where he was from. He pointed behind himself toward the dense hill and said, "Up there." I asked if he lived by Suffolk. He paused, shook his head, and said no. I asked what made him decide to come out to the pond today, and he simply said, "Why not?" His responses were dry, and he did not contribute a single interesting detail. He just sat there with a faint, empty half-smile plastered across his face. I was thoroughly creeped out. My hands were shaking, and my chest felt incredibly tight. We were completely surrounded by thick trees in every direction, right in the middle of a deep pond, with absolutely nobody around. I slowly and subtly began to row my kayak closer to the shoreline, trying to play it off as finding a better fishing spot. But my heart sank when I saw that he was steering his boat to follow me. I remarked on what a great day it was, but I could feel a distinct tremble in my words. Finally, as my kayak drifted close to the shallow water, I told him that I thought I was going to call it a day and head home. The faint, creepy smile he had been wearing suddenly vanished. His face went completely cold. He looked at me and said that he could not let me leave. Before I could even process those words, he reached down and lifted his flannel shirt to expose a heavy black handgun in his jeans. The moment my eyes registered the weapon, I simply dove straight out of my kayak and landed in the shallow water. I scrambled onto the bank and ran as fast as I could. I ran the entire half-mile uphill through the thick brush, not caring about the branches scratching my face. I did not dare to look back. I finally burst through the trees near my house, ran inside, and locked every window and door. I left all the lights off as it got dark, peeking through a tiny crack in the blinds to make sure I was not followed. By midnight, the neighborhood was completely silent. I decided to go upstairs to try and get some sleep, leaving my second-floor windows open to let a cool breeze circulate. About half an hour after falling under the covers, I heard leaves crunching directly outside, right below my window. My eyes snapped open. It was the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps in the yard. I sat frozen, shaking uncontrollably out of pure terror. Then a voice drifted up through the open window. It said, "Hey buddy, you up there, are you trying to sleep? Sorry, I did not mean to wake you." It was the exact same voice from the pond. I did not make a sound. I crept downstairs to the kitchen, practically crawling to avoid being seen, and dialed 911. I whispered into the phone, pleading for help. The next 20 minutes felt like a lifetime. When the police finally arrived, they searched the property but found absolutely nothing. I stayed with a friend and moved away a month later. I never saw the man again, but the paranoia stayed with me for a long time. Now, let me tell you about another incident that took place on the water, this time out by the bay. I was 17 and I joined my brother-in-law Jack on his luxury boat. Jack came from money, so he always had an easy life, and ever since my sister Lexi married him, she had been living the same dream. Their house was right on the bay, with a private dock leading to a massive boat named Lexi. We set sail early in the morning. Jack had packed tons of food, including hamburger meat for the barbecue grill he had installed on the deck. A few hours in, the trip was not as fun as I had hoped. The fishing was slow and the adults were getting really drunk. My sister kept scolding me, refusing to let me have a drink because of my age. The only part of the trip I enjoyed was relaxing on the back deck of the massive boat. As the sun began to set, turning the sky a beautiful orange, Jack put the burgers on the grill. By the time we finished eating, it was pitch black. There is something incredibly calming, yet deeply unsettling, about being in the middle of the ocean at night. By this point, everyone except me was insane drunk, blasting music and laughing. Eventually they invited me inside to play cards. Since I was bored, I grabbed an extra beer from the bar. My sister was too drunk to notice or care. After a few drinks, I was finally able to loosen up. The music was incredibly loud, so I went and turned it down. Jack and his buddies were completely out of it. Suddenly, over the lower music, one of Jack's friends and I noticed a strange noise. I turned off the music completely. From the dark water outside, we could hear the faint sound of two men calling for help. We rushed out onto the deck. Roped to our side was a much smaller boat with two men looking up at us. I asked what the problem was, and one of them said they were out of food and gasoline. I looked at the others, but they were in no state to make decisions. The burden of what to do fell on me. Jack clumsily went to get a ladder, tripping and breaking his beer bottle. I helped him hook the ladder to the railing, and the two men climbed on board. They thanked us, but Jack and the others could barely speak. I apologized to the men, explaining that everyone had had too much to drink. The men did not seem to care. They asked if we had any extra food. We led them to the kitchen, and Jack handed them the leftover burgers. They shoveled them down incredibly fast, which made me feel very uncomfortable. Then Jack handed them a large plastic can of gasoline, and the two men thanked us before climbing back down to their boat. We all went to sleep after that. My sister and Jack took the bedroom, while his friends and I slept on the pull-out cotton couches. I lay on the hard couch for an hour, completely unable to sleep. Eventually, I got up to use the bathroom. Jack had told us to pee into the ocean to conserve water, so I opened the door to step outside, but instead of the calm water, I heard the faint hum of a boat motor. The ocean was pitch black, so I climbed up to the controls and turned on the powerful searchlight. I swept the beam of light across the dark water. I turned it 90 degrees, then 180 degrees, and found nothing. As I reached about 3/4 of a full spin, the light illuminated the small boat from before. It was coming closer. At that exact second, a blood-curdling scream echoed from below. I jumped down to the deck and ran inside. One of Jack's friends was standing in the corner, shaking with fear, while the other was sitting up in shock. Jack and my sister burst out of the bedroom. Jack was trembling, barely able to speak. He said he had just woken up to see two dark figures standing directly over his bed. The intruders had immediately bolted out the door. We ran outside, but the deck was completely empty. I pointed the searchlight, but the small boat was already gone. When we searched our belongings, we realized they had stolen several cans of gasoline, Jack's wallet, and his house keys from the kitchen table. We immediately started the engines and sped back to Jack's house, which took 4 agonizing hours. Fortunately, nobody had broken into the home. Jack used a spare key hidden in the yard to let us inside. The next morning, they hired a locksmith to change every single lock on the property, including the deadbolts and the gate locks. They were terrified that the men would use the stolen keys to slip inside while they slept. A few weeks later, their security cameras caught footage of 2 suspicious men wearing dark hoodies walking up to their front door in the middle of the night. The video showed them inserting a key into the lock, trying to open the door, and failing. When they realized the lock had been changed, they quickly turned and ran off into the dark. We are 99% sure it was the same 2 men from the ocean. These chilling encounters on the water seem to happen when you least expect them, even in the most quiet and desolate locations. When I was 21 years old, I went on a fishing trip with my 84-year-old grandfather. It was the very first time we had ever gone fishing together. We took an hour-long drive away from our suburban home, heading deep into a highly desolate and undeveloped part of the state. My grandfather had a secret lake that absolutely nobody else seemed to know about, where he always managed to catch coolers full of fish. My grandfather was a hardcore fisherman. On the drive over, he kept throwing out all these complex fishing terms that I did not understand at all. Eventually, the paved road ended, and we veered off onto a narrow, rugged dirt trail. We drove down this bumpy path for about 2 miles before he parked his Jeep. From there, we had to carry a small, heavy aluminum boat through a dense forest to reach the water. My grandfather was incredibly strong for his age, carrying his end with ease while I was completely exhausted. We pushed the boat into the water and climbed inside. After showing me the proper way to cast my line, my grandfather fell completely silent. He seemed to enter a state of deep concentration, staring intently at the surface of the lake. I fished quietly for a while, but eventually I turned around to ask him a question. When I looked at him, I noticed he was leaning far over the side of the boat, his face just inches from the water. He did not respond to my voice. I figured he was just concentrating on a catch, so I turned back around. About 20 seconds later, I turned around again. This time, he was leaning even further over the edge, almost to the point of falling in. I felt a sudden surge of worry and reached out to place my hand on his shoulder. Before I could speak, A sudden, violent splashing sound erupted from the water right beside him. Through the spray of water, I watched in absolute shock as my grandfather frantically used his hands to push something heavy and solid back down into the dark depths of the lake. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with pure panic. He screamed at the top of his lungs, telling me to grab the paddles and row as fast as I possibly could back toward the shore. I did not ask questions. I grabbed the oars and paddled with every ounce of strength in my body. The moment the front of the boat hit the dirt, my grandfather leaped out. We ran through the forest, leaving the boat and all of our expensive gear behind. We scrambled into the Jeep, and my grandfather slammed his foot onto the gas pedal, sending the vehicle flying down the bumpy dirt trails. The tires kicked up huge clouds of dust as we tore through the wilderness, desperate to put as much distance between ourselves and that lakeside as possible. As we sped away, I was screaming at him, begging him to tell me what had just happened. He kept his eyes glued to the trail, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. It took him 10 minutes of silent driving to finally speak. He slowly explained that as he was looking down into the water, he noticed a strange shape. He said he saw something moving deep down, and it kept getting closer to the surface. As it rose, the shape became clearer, until he could swear he was looking at the distinct features of a face. He leaned in closer to get a better look, and at that exact moment, a pale arm reached straight out of the water and grabbed a tight hold of him. It was the most he would say about the incident for weeks. Eventually, he tried his best to describe the face he had seen. From his description, it sounded chillingly human, yet completely wrong. He looked at me with a serious, haunted expression and said that all he knew for sure was that it was absolutely not some kind of ordinary fish. These stories serve as a chilling reminder that the open water holds secrets we may never fully understand. Whether it is a stranger with a hidden weapon on a quiet pond, opportunistic intruders on a luxury yacht in the middle of the night, or something inexplicable reaching out from the dark depths of a hidden lake, the water is a place of beauty, but also of deep, unpredictable danger. We must always remain vigilant, because once you decide to leave the safety of the shore, you are entering a mysterious world where you are absolutely no longer in control. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.